Everyone in the field of nutrition science stands on the shoulders of Dr. Campbell, who is one of the giants in the field. This is one of the most important books about nutrition ever written. Reading it may save your life. Dean Ornish, MD. The most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted. The startling implications for diet, weight loss and long-term health. T. Colin Campbell, PhD. And Thomas M. Campbell II. Foreword by John Robbins, author, Diet for a New America. T. Praise for the China study. The China study gives critical, life-saving nutritional information for every health seeker in America. But it is much more. Dr. Campbell's expose of the research and medical establishment makes this book a fascinating read and one that could change the future for all of us. Every healthcare provider and researcher in the world must read it. Joel Fuhrman, MD. Author of the best-selling book, Eat to Live. Backed by well-documented, peer-reviewed studies and overwhelming statistics, the case for a vegetarian diet as a foundation for a healthy lifestyle has never been stronger. Bradley Saul, OrganicaTHLead.com. The China study is the most important book on nutrition and health to come out in the last 75 years. Everyone should read it, and it should be the model for all nutrition programs taught at universities. The reading is engrossing if not astounding. The science is conclusive. Dr. Campbell's integrity and commitment to truthful nutrition education shine through. David Klein, publisher-editor. Living Nutrition Magazine. The China study describes a monumental survey of diet and death rates from cancer in more than 2,400 Chinese counties and the equally monumental efforts to explore its significance and implications for nutrition and health. Dr. Campbell and his son, Thomas, have written a lively, provocative, and important book that deserves widespread attention. Frank Rhodes, Ph.D. President, 1978 to 1995, Emeritus, Cornell University. Colin Campbell's The China Study is an important book, and a highly readable one. With his son, Tom, Colin studies the relationship between diet and disease, and his conclusions are startling. The China study is a story that needs to be heard. Robert C. Richardson, Ph.D. Nobel Prize winner, Professor of Physics, and Vice Provost of Research, Cornell University. The China study is the account of a groundbreaking research study that provides the answers long sought by physicians, scientists, and health-conscious readers. Based on painstaking investigations over many years, it unearths surprising answers to the most important nutritional questions of our time. What really causes cancer? How can we extend our lives? What will turn around the obesity epidemic? 7. The China study quickly and easily dispenses with fad diets, relying on solid and convincing evidence. Clearly and beautifully written by one of the world's most respected nutrition authorities, the China study represents a major turning point in our understanding of health. Neil Barnard, MD, President, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Everyone in the field of nutrition science stands on the shoulders of T. Colin Campbell, who is one of the giants in the field. This is one of the most important books about nutrition ever written. Reading it may save your life. Dean Ornish, MD, founder and president, Preventive Medicine Research Institute Clinical Professor of Medicine, University of California, San Francisco. Author, Dr. Dean Ornish's Program for Reversing Heart Disease and Love and Survival. The China study is the most convincing evidence yet on preventing heart disease, cancer, and other Western diseases by dietary means. It is the book of choice both for economically developed countries and for countries undergoing rapid economical transition and lifestyle change. Junqi Chen, MD, Ph.D., Senior Research Professor, Institute of Nutrition and Food Safety, Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention. All concerned with the obesity epidemic, their own health, and the staggering environmental and social impacts of the Western diet will find wise and practical solutions in Dr. Campbell's The China Study. Robert Goodland, Lead Advisor on the Environment. The World Bank Group, 1978 to 2001. Dr. Campbell's book The China Study is a moving and insightful history of the struggle still ongoing to understand and explain the vital connection between our health and what we eat. Dr. Campbell knows this subject from the inside. He has pioneered the investigation of the diet-cancer link since the days of the seminal China Study, the NAS report, Diet, Nutrition, and Cancer, and AICR's expert panel report, Food, Nutrition and the Prevention of Cancer, a Global Perspective. Consequently, he is able to illuminate every aspect of this question. Today, AICR advocates a predominantly plant-based diet for lower cancer risk because of the great work Dr. Campbell and just a few other visionaries began 25 years ago. Marilyn Gentry, President, American Institute for Cancer Research. The China Study is a well-documented analysis of the fallacies of the modern diet, lifestyle, and medicine and the quick-fix approach that often fails. The lessons from China provide compelling rationale for a plant-based diet to promote health and reduce the risk of the diseases of affluence. Sushma Palmer, Ph.D., former Executive Director, Food and Nutrition Board, U.S. National Academy of Sciences. The China Study is extraordinarily helpful, superbly written, and profoundly important. Dr. Campbell's work is revolutionary in its implications and spectacular in its clarity. I learned an immense amount from this brave and wise book. If you want to eat bacon and eggs for breakfast, and then take cholesterol-lowering medication, that's your right. But if you want to truly take charge of your health, read the China Study and do it soon. If you heed the counsel of this outstanding guide, your body will thank you every day for the rest of your life. John Robbins, author of the best-selling books, Diet for a New America and the Food Revolution. The China Study is a rare treat. Finally, a world-renowned nutritional scholar has explained the truth about diet and health in a way that everyone can easily understand, a startling truth that everyone needs to know. In this superb volume, Dr. Campbell has distilled, with his son, Tom, for us the wisdom of his brilliant career. If you feel any confusion about how to find the healthiest path for yourself and your family, you will find precious answers in the China Study. Don't miss it. Douglas Lyle, Ph.D., and Alan Goldhamer, D.C., authors of The Pleasure Trap, Mastering the Hidden Force that Undermines Health and Happiness. So many diet and health books contain conflicting advice, but most have one thing in common: an agenda to sell something. Dr. Campbell's only agenda is truth. As a distinguished professor at Cornell University, Dr. Campbell is the Einstein of nutrition. The China Study is based on hardcore scientific research, not the rank speculation of his own, Atkins, 5 Booger Busters, or any other current fad. Dr. Campbell lays out his lifetime of research in an accessible, entertaining way. Read this book and you will know why. Jeff Nelson, President, VegSource.com, most visited food website in the world. If you're looking to enhance your health, performance, and your success. Read the China study immediately. Finally, scientifically valid guidance on how much protein we need and where we should get it. The impact of these findings is enormous. John Allen Mollenhauer, founder, MyTrainer.com and Nutrientrich.com. The China study, the most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted, and the startling implications for diet, weight loss, and long-term health. T. Colin Campbell, Ph.D. and Thomas M. Campbell 2. Ben Bella Books. Dallas, Texas. Nothing written in this book should be viewed as a substitute for competent medical care. Also, you should not undertake any changes in diet or exercise patterns without first consulting your physician, especially if you are currently being treated for any risk factor related to heart disease, high blood pressure, or adult onset diabetes. Copyright 2006 by T. Colin Campbell, Ph.D., and Thomas M. Campbell 2. First Ben Bella Books paperback edition 2006. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be used or reproduced in any manner whatsoever without written permission except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical articles or reviews. Ben Bella Books Incorporated. 6440 N. Central Expressway, Suite 503. Dallas, Texas, 75206. Send feedback to feedback@benbellabooks.com. Printed in the United States of America. 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. ISBN 1-9321000-66-0. The Library of Congress has cataloged the hardcover edition as follow. Campbell, T. Colin, 1934. The China Study, the most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted, and the startling implications for diet, weight loss, and long-term health / by T. Colin Campbell and Thomas M. Campbell 2. P. C.M. ISBN 1-932100038-5. L. Nutrition. 2. Nutritionally induced diseases. 3. Diet in disease. I. Campbell, Thomas M. 2. Title: RA 784.C2352004. 613. 2 DC 22. Cover design by Melody K. Dungog. Text design and composition by John Reinhardt. Book design. Printed by Victor Graphics Incorporated. Distributed by Independent Publishers Group. To order, call 800-888-4741. www.ipgbook.com. 200-400-7985. For special sales, contact Robin White at robin@benbellabooks.com. To Karen Campbell, whose incredible love and caring made this book possible. And to Thomas McElwain Campbell and Betty Demet Campbell for their incredible gifts. Acknowledgements. This book, from its original conception to its final form, was in the making for many years. But it was the last 3 that gave the book form. And this happened because Karen, my lifelong love and wife of 43 years, made it. So, I wanted to do it, but she wanted it even more. She said it had to be done for the children of the world. She cajoled, she pushed, and she insisted that we keep our nose to the grindstone. She read every word, those kept and those discarded, some several times. Most importantly, Karen first suggested that I work with Tom, the youngest of our 5 children. His writing skills, his persistence in keeping integrity with the message, and his exceptionally quick learning of the subject matter made the project possible. He wrote several chapters in this book himself and rewrote many more, bringing clarity to my message. And our other children, Nelson and wife Kim, Leanne, Keith, Dan, and grandchildren, Whitney, Colin, Stephen, Nelson, Laura, could not have been more encouraging. Their love and support cannot be measured in mere words. I also am indebted to another family of mine, my many undergraduate honors students, postgraduate doctoral students, postdoctoral research associates, and my fellow professorial colleagues who worked in my research group and who were the gems of my career. Regretfully, I could only cite in this book a small sample of their findings, but far, far more could have been included. Yet more friends, associates, and family contributed mightily, through their meticulous reading of various versions of the manuscript and their detailed feedback. Alphabetically, they included Nelson Campbell, Ron Campbell, Kent Carroll, Antonia Demas, Mark Epstein, John and Martha Ferger, Kimberly Cathan, Doug Lyle, John Robbins, Paul Suntrup, and Glenn Yeffeth. Advice, support, and generous help also came in many other forms from Neil Barnard, Jody Blanco, Junchi Chen, Robert Goodland, Michael Jacobson, Ted Lang, Howard Lyman. 11. 12. The Hina Study. Bob Mikoi, John Allen Mollenhauer, Jeff Nelson, Sushma Palmer, Jeff Prince, Frank Rhodes, Bob Richardson, and Kathy Ward. Of course, I am grateful to all those at Ben Bella Books, including Glenn Yeffeth, Shauna Kagi, Megan Kuckelman, Laura Watkins, and Leah Wilson, for turning a messy Word document into the book you now have. In addition, Kent Carroll added professionalism, understanding, and a clear vision with his valuable editing work. The heart of this book is the China study itself. It was not the whole story, of course, but it was the tipping point in the development of my ideas. The actual study in China could not have happened without the extraordinary leadership and dedicated hard work of Junchi Chen and Li Jinyeo in Beijing, Sir Richard Pito and Gillian Borum at the University of Oxford in England, and Linda Youngman, Martin Root, and Banu Parpia in my own group at Cornell. Dr. Chen directed more than 200 professional workers as they carried out the nationwide study in China. His professional and personal characteristics have been an inspiration to me. It is his kind of work and persona that makes this world a better place. Similarly, Drs. Caldwell Esselstyn, Jr., and John McDougall, and Mary, respectively, generously agreed to participate in this book. Their dedication and courage are inspiring. All of this was possible, of course, because of the exceptional start given to me by my parents, Tom and Betty Campbell, to whom this book is dedicated. Their love and dedication created for me and my siblings more opportunities than they ever dreamed of having. I must also credit my colleagues who have worked to discredit my ideas and, not infrequently, me personally. They inspire in a different way. They compel me to ask why there is so much unnecessary hostility to ideas that should be part of the scientific debate. In searching for answers, I have gained a wiser, more unique perspective that I could not have considered otherwise. Lastly, I must thank you, the tax-paying American public. You funded my work for more than 4 decades, and I hope that in telling you the lessons I've learned, I can begin to repay my debt to you. T. Colin Campbell. In addition to all those listed previously, I acknowledge my parents. My involvement in this book was, and still is, a gift from them I shall cherish for the Rest of my life. Words cannot describe my good fortune in having parents who are such wonderful teachers, supporters, and motivators. Also, Kimberly Cathan provided support, advice, companionship, and passion for this project. She made the lows bearable and the highs exceptional in this great roller coaster of an adventure. Thomas M. Campbell, 2. Contents. Introduction. Port I, the Chino Study. 1. Problems we face, solutions we need. 2. A house of proteins. 3. Turning off cancer. 4. Lessons from China. Port 2, diseases of affluence. 1. 11. 27. 43. 69. 5. Broken hearts 111. 6. Obesity 135. 7. Diabetes 145. 8. Common cancers, breast, prostate, large bowel, colon and rectal, 157. 9. Autoimmune diseases 183. 10. Wide-ranging effects, bone, kidney, eye, and brain diseases 203. Port 3, the Good Nutrition Guide. 11. Eating right, 8 Principles of Food and Health. 12. How to eat. 13. 225. 241. 14 Contents. Port 4, why haven't you heard this before? 13. Science the Dark Side 251. 14. Scientific Reductionism 269. 15. The Science of Industry 289. 16. Government, is it for the people? 305. 17. Big Medicine, whose health are they protecting? 321. 18. Repeating Histories 343. Appendix A. Q&A, Protein Effect in Experimental Rat Studies 351. Appendix B. Experimental Design of the China Study 353. Appendix C. The Vitamin D Connection 361. References 369. Preface. T. Colin Campbell, at his core, is still a farm boy from Northern Virginia. When we spend time together, we inevitably share our stories from the farm. Whether it is spreading cow manure, driving tractors, or herding cattle, both of us share a rich history in farming. But from these backgrounds, both he and I went on to other careers. It is for his other career accomplishments that I came to admire Colin. He was involved in the discovery of a chemical later called dioxin, and he went on to direct one of the most important diet and health studies ever conducted, the China Study. In between, he authored hundreds of scientific papers, sat on numerous government expert panels, and helped shape national and international diet and health organizations, like the American Institute for Cancer Research / World Cancer Research Fund. As a scientist, he has played an instrumental role in how our country views diet and health. And yet, as I have gotten to know Colin on a personal level, I have come to respect him for reasons other than just his list of professional accomplishments. I have come to respect him for his courage and integrity. Colin seriously questions the status quo, and even though the scientific evidence is on his side, going against the grain is never easy. I know this well because I have been a co-defendant with Oprah Winfrey when a group of cattlemen decided to sue her after she stated her intention not to eat beef. I have been in Washington, D.C., lobbying for better agricultural practices and fighting to change the way we raise and grow food in this country. I have taken on some of the most influential, well-funded groups in the country, and I know that it's not easy. 16. The China study. Because of our parallel paths, I feel connected to Colin's story. We started on the farm, learning independence, honesty, and integrity in small communities, and went on to become established in mainstream careers. Although we both had success, I still remember the first 7-figure check I wrote for my massive cattle operation in Montana. We came to realize that the system we lived in could use some improvements. Challenging the system that provided us with such rewards has demanded an iron will and steadfast integrity. Colin has both, and this book is a brilliant capstone to a long and dignified career. We would do well to learn from Colin, who has reached the top of his profession and then had the courage to reach even higher by demanding change. Whether you have interest in your personal health or in the wretched state of health in the United States, this book will richly reward you. Read it carefully, absorb its information and apply it to your life. Howard Lyman, author of Mad Cowboy. Forward. If you are like most Americans today, you are surrounded by fast food chain restaurants. You are barraged by ads for junk foods. You see other ads for weight loss programs that say you can eat whatever you want, not exercise and still lose weight. It's easier to find a Snickers bar, a Big Mac or a Coke than it is to find an apple. And your kids eat at a school cafeteria whose idea of a vegetable is the ketchup on the burgers. You go to your doctor for health tips. In the waiting room, you find a glossy 243-page magazine titled Family Doctor, Your Essential Guide to Health and Well-Being. Published by the American Academy of Family Physicians and sent free to the offices of all SOOO family doctors in the United States in 2004, it's full of glossy full-page color ads for McDonald's, Dr. Pepper, chocolate pudding, and Oreo cookies. You pick up an issue of National Geographic Kids, a magazine published by the National Geographic Society for ages 6 and up, expecting to find wholesome reading for youngsters. The pages, however, are filled with ads for Twinkies, M&Ms, Frosted Flakes, Fruit Loops, Hostess cupcakes and Stremegelo pudding sticks. This is what scientists and food activists at Yale University call a toxic food environment. It is the environment in which most of us live today. The inescapable fact is that certain people are making an awful lot of money today selling foods that are unhealthy. They want you to keep eating the foods they sell, even though doing so makes you fat, depletes your vitality and shortens and degrades your life. They want you docile, compliant and ignorant. They do not want you informed, active and passionately alive, and they are quite willing to spend billions of dollars annually to accomplish their goals. 18. The HENA study. You can acquiesce to all this, you can succumb to the junk food sellers. Or you can find a healthier and more life-affirming relationship with your body and the food you eat. If you want to live with radiant health, lean and clear and alive in your body, you will need an ally in today's environment. Fortunately, you have in your hand just such an ally. T. Colin Campbell, PhD, is widely recognized as a brilliant scholar, a dedicated researcher and a great humanitarian. Having had the pleasure and privilege to be his friend, I can attest to all of that, and I can also add something else. He is also a man of humility and human depth, a man whose love for others guides his every step. Dr. Campbell's new book The China Study is a great ray of light in the darkness of our times, illuminating the landscape and the realities of diet and health so clearly, so fully, that you need never again fall prey to those who profit from keeping you misinformed, confused, and obediently eating the foods they sell. One of the many things I appreciate about this book is that Dr. Campbell doesn't just give you his conclusions. He doesn't preach from on high, telling what you should and shouldn't eat, as if you were a child. Instead, like a good and trusted friend who happens to have learned, discovered and done more in his life than most of us could ever imagine, he gently, clearly, and skillfully gives you the information and data you need to fully understand what's involved in diet and health today. He empowers you to make informed choices. Sure, he makes recommendations and suggestions, and terrific ones at that. But he always shows you how he has arrived at his conclusions. The data and the truth are what are important. His only agenda is to help you live as informed and healthy a life as possible. I've read the China Study twice already, and each time I've learned an immense amount. This is a brave and wise book. The China Study is extraordinarily helpful, superbly written and profoundly important. Dr. Campbell's work is revolutionary in its implications and spectacular in its clarity. If you want to eat bacon and eggs for breakfast and then take cholesterol-lowering medication, that's your right. But if you want to truly take charge of your health, read the China Study, and do it soon. If you heed the counsel of this outstanding guide, your body will thank you every day for the rest of your life. John Robbins, author of Diet for a New America, Reclaiming Our Health and the Food Revolution. Introduction. The public's hunger for nutrition information never ceases to amaze me. Even after devoting my entire working life to conducting experimental research into nutrition and health, diet books are perennial bestsellers. Almost every popular magazine features nutrition advice, newspapers regularly run articles, and TV and radio programs constantly discuss diet and health. Given the barrage of information, are you confident that you know what you should be doing to improve your health? Should you buy food that is labeled organic to avoid pesticide exposure? Are environmental chemicals a primary cause of cancer? Or is your health predetermined by the genes you inherited when you were born? Do carbohydrates really make you fat? Should you be more concerned about the total amount of fat you eat, or just saturated fats and trans fats? What vitamins, if any, should you be taking? Do you buy foods that are fortified with extra fiber? Should you eat fish, and, if so, how often? Will eating soy foods prevent heart disease? My guess is that you're not really sure of the answers to these questions. If this is the case, then you aren't alone. Even though information and opinions are plentiful, very few people truly know what they should be doing to improve their health. This isn't because the research hasn't been done. It has. We know an enormous amount about the links between nutrition and health. But the real science has been buried beneath a clutter of irrelevant or even harmful information, junk science, fad diets, and food industry propaganda. To the China Study. I want to change that. I want to give you a new framework for understanding nutrition and health, a framework that eliminates confusion, prevents and treats disease, and allows you to live a more fulfilling life. I have been in the system for almost 50 years, at the very highest levels, designing and directing large research projects, deciding which research gets funded, and translating massive amounts of scientific research into national expert panel reports. After a long career in research and policy making, I now understand why Americans are so confused. As a taxpayer who foots the bill for research and health policy in America, you deserve to know that many of the common notions you have been told about food, health, and disease are wrong. Synthetic chemicals in the environment and in your food, as problematic as they may be, are not the main cause of cancer. The genes that you inherit from your parents are not the most important factors in determining whether you fall prey to any of the 10 leading causes of death. The hope that genetic research will eventually lead to drug cures for diseases ignores more powerful solutions that can be employed today. Obsessively controlling your intake of any one nutrient, such as carbohydrates, fat, cholesterol, or omega-3 fats, will not result in long-term health. Vitamins and nutrient supplements do not give you long-term protection against disease. Drugs and surgery don't cure the diseases that kill most Americans. Your doctor probably does not know what you need to do to be the healthiest you can be. I propose to do nothing less than redefine what we think of as good nutrition. The provocative results of my 4 decades of biomedical research, including the findings from a 27-year laboratory program, funded by the most reputable funding agencies, prove that eating right can save your life. I will not ask you to believe conclusions based on my personal observations, as some popular authors do. There are over 750 references in this book, and the vast majority of them are primary sources of information, including hundreds of scientific publications from other researchers. Introduction 3. That point the way to less cancer, less heart disease, fewer strokes, less obesity, less diabetes, less autoimmune disease, less osteoporosis, less Alzheimer's, less kidney stones, and less blindness. Some of the findings, published in the most reputable scientific journals, show that dietary change can enable diabetic patients to go off their medication. Heart disease can be reversed with diet alone. Breast cancer is related to levels of female hormones in the blood, which are determined by the food we eat. Consuming dairy foods can increase the risk of prostate cancer. Antioxidants, found in fruits and vegetables, are linked to better mental performance in old age. Kidney stones can be prevented by a healthy diet. Type 1 diabetes, one of the most devastating diseases that can befall a child, is convincingly linked to infant feeding practices. These findings demonstrate that a good diet is the most powerful weapon we have against disease and sickness. An understanding of this scientific evidence is not only important for improving health, it also has profound implications for our entire society. We must know why misinformation dominates our society and why we are grossly mistaken in how we investigate diet and disease, how we promote health, and how we treat illness. By any number of measures, America's health is failing. We spend far more per capita on health care than any other society in the world, and yet 2/3 of Americans are overweight, and over 15 million Americans have diabetes, a number that has been rising rapidly. We fall prey to heart disease as often as we did 30 years ago, and the war on cancer, launched in the 1970s, has been a miserable failure. Half of Americans have a health problem that requires taking a prescription drug every week, and over 100 million Americans have high cholesterol. To make matters worse, we are leading our youth down a path of disease earlier and earlier in their lives. 1/3 of the young people in this country are overweight or at risk of becoming overweight. Increasingly, they are falling prey to a form of diabetes that used to be seen only in adults, and these young people now take more prescription drugs than ever before. These issues all come down to three things: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 4THECHINA STU DY. More than 40 years ago, at the beginning of my career, I would have never guessed that food is so closely related to health problems. For years, I never gave much thought to which foods were best to eat. I just ate what everyone else did, what I was told was good food. We all eat what is tasty or what is convenient or what our parents taught us to prefer. Most of us live within cultural boundaries that define our food preferences and habits. So it was with me. I was raised on a dairy farm where milk was central to our existence. We were told in school that cow's milk made strong, healthy bones and teeth. It was nature's most perfect food. On our farm, we produced most of our own food in the garden or in the livestock pastures. I was the first in my family to go to college. I studied pre-veterinary medicine at Penn State and then attended veterinary school at the University of Georgia for a year when Cornell University beckoned with scholarship money for me to do graduate research in animal nutrition. I transferred, in part, because they were going to pay me to go to school, instead of me paying them. There I did a master's degree. I was the last graduate student of Professor Clive McKay, a Cornell professor famed for extending the lives of rats by feeding them much less food than they would otherwise eat. My PhD research at Cornell was devoted to finding better ways to make cows and sheep grow faster. I was attempting to improve on our ability to produce animal protein, the cornerstone of what I was told was good nutrition. I was on a trail to promote better health by advocating the consumption of more meat, milk, and eggs. It was an obvious sequel to my own life on the farm, and I was happy to believe that the American diet was the best in the world. Through these formative years, I encountered a recurring theme: we were supposedly eating the right foods, especially plenty of high-quality animal protein. Much of my early career was spent working with two of the most toxic chemicals ever discovered, dioxin and aflatoxin. I initially worked at MIT, where I was assigned a chicken feed puzzle. Millions of chicks a year were dying from an unknown toxic chemical in their feed, and I had the responsibility of isolating and determining the structure of this chemical. After 2.5 years, I helped discover dioxin, arguably the most toxic chemical ever found. This chemical has since received widespread attention, especially because it was part of the herbicide 2,4,5-T, or Agent Orange, then being used to defoliate forests in the Vietnam War. Introduction 5. After leaving MIT and taking a faculty position at Virginia Tech, I began coordinating technical assistance for a nationwide project in the Philippines working with malnourished children. Part of the project became an investigation of the unusually high prevalence of liver cancer, usually an adult disease, in Filipino children. It was thought that high consumption of aflatoxin, a mold toxin found in peanuts and corn, caused this problem. Aflatoxin has been called one of the most potent carcinogens ever discovered. For 10 years, our primary goal in the Philippines was to improve childhood malnutrition among the poor, a project funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Eventually, we established about LLO nutrition self-help education centers around the country. The aim of these efforts in the Philippines was simple: make sure that children were getting as much protein as possible. It was widely thought that much of the childhood malnutrition in the world was caused by a lack of protein, especially from animal-based foods. Universities and Governments around the world were working to alleviate a perceived protein gap in the developing world. In this project, however, I uncovered a dark secret. Children who ate the highest protein diets were the ones most likely to get liver cancer. They were the children of the wealthiest families. I then noticed a research report from India that had some very provocative, relevant findings. Indian researchers had studied two groups of rats. In one group, they administered the cancer-causing aflatoxin, then fed a diet that was composed of 20% protein, a level near what many of us consume in the West. In the other group, they administered the same amount of aflatoxin, but then fed a diet that was only composed of 5% protein. Incredibly, every single animal that consumed the 20% protein diet had evidence of liver cancer, and every single animal that consumed a 5% protein diet avoided liver cancer. It was a 100-0 score, leaving no doubt that nutrition trumped chemical carcinogens, even very potent carcinogens, in controlling cancer. This information countered everything I had been taught. It was heretical to say that protein wasn't healthy, let alone say it promoted cancer. It was a defining moment in my career. Investigating such a provocative question so early in my career was not a very wise choice. Questioning protein and animal-based foods in general ran the risk of my being labeled a heretic, even if it passed the test of good science. But I never was much for following directions just for the sake of 6. The China study. Following directions. When I first learned to drive a team of horses or herd cattle, to hunt animals, to fish our creek or to work in the fields, I came to accept that independent thinking was part of the deal. It had to be. Encountering problems in the field meant that I had to figure out what to do next. It was a great classroom, as any farm boy can tell you. That sense of independence has stayed with me until today. So, faced with a difficult decision, I decided to start an in-depth laboratory program that would investigate the role of nutrition, especially protein, in the development of cancer. My colleagues and I were cautious in framing our hypotheses, rigorous in our methodology and conservative in interpreting our findings. I chose to do this research at a very basic science level, studying the biochemical details of cancer formation. It was important to understand not only whether but also how protein might promote cancer. It was the best of all worlds. By carefully following the rules of good science, I was able to study a provocative topic without provoking knee-jerk responses that arise with radical ideas. Eventually, this research became handsomely funded for 27 years by the best reviewed and most competitive funding sources, mostly the National Institutes of Health, NIH, the American Cancer Society and the American Institute for Cancer Research. Then our results were reviewed a second time for publication in many of the best scientific journals. What we found was shocking. Low-protein diets inhibited the initiation of cancer by aflatoxin, regardless of how much of this carcinogen was administered to these animals. After cancer initiation was completed, low-protein diets also dramatically block subsequent cancer growth. In other words, the cancer-producing effects of this highly carcinogenic chemical were rendered insignificant by a low-protein diet. In fact, dietary protein proved to be so powerful in its effect that we could tum on and tum off cancer growth simply by changing the level consumed. Furthermore, the amounts of protein being fed were those that we humans routinely consume. We didn't use extraordinary levels, as is so often the case in carcinogen studies. But that's not all. We found that not all proteins had this effect. What? Protein consistently and strongly promoted cancer? Casein, which makes up 87% of cow's milk protein, promoted all stages of the cancer process. What type of protein did not promote cancer, even at high levels of intake? The safe proteins were from plants, including wheat and soy. As this picture came into view, it began to challenge and then to shatter some of my most cherished assumptions. Introduction 7. These experimental animal studies didn't end there. I went on to direct the most comprehensive study of diet, lifestyle, and disease ever done with humans in the history of biomedical research. It was a massive undertaking jointly arranged through Cornell University, Oxford University, and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine. The New York Times called it the Grand Prix of Epidemiology. This project surveyed a vast range of diseases and diet and lifestyle factors in rural China and, more recently, in Taiwan. More commonly known as the China Study, this project eventually produced more than 8,000 statistically significant associations between various dietary factors and disease. What made this project especially remarkable is that, among the many associations that are relevant to diet and disease, so many pointed to the same finding: people who ate the most animal-based foods got the most chronic disease. Even relatively small intakes of animal-based food were associated with adverse effects. People who ate the most plant-based foods were the healthiest and tended to avoid chronic disease. These results could not be ignored. From the initial experimental animal studies on animal protein effects to this massive human study on dietary patterns, the findings proved to be consistent. The health implications of consuming either animal or plant-based nutrients were remarkably different. I could not, and did not, rest on the findings of our animal studies and the massive human study in China, however impressive they may have been. I sought out the findings of other researchers and clinicians. The findings of these individuals have proved to be some of the most exciting findings of the past 50 years. These findings, the contents of part 2 of this book, show that heart disease, diabetes, and obesity can be reversed by a healthy diet. Other research shows that various cancers, autoimmune diseases, bone health, kidney health, vision, and brain disorders in old age, like cognitive dysfunction and Alzheimer's, are convincingly influenced by diet. Most importantly, the diet that has time and again been shown to reverse and/or prevent these diseases is the same whole foods, plant-based diet that I had found to promote optimal health in my laboratory research and in the China study. The findings are consistent. Yet, despite the power of this information, despite the hope it generates, and despite the urgent need for this understanding of nutrition and health, people are still confused. I have friends with heart disease who are resigned and despondent about being at the mercy of what they ate. The China study considered to be an inevitable disease. I've talked with women who are so terrified of breast cancer that they wish to have their own breasts, even their daughters' breasts, surgically removed, as if that's the only way to minimize risk. So many of the people I have met have been led down a path of illness, despondence, and confusion about their health and what they can do to protect it. Americans are confused, and I will tell you why. The answer, discussed in part 4, has to do with how health information is generated and communicated and who controls such activities. Because I have been behind the scenes generating health information for so long, I have seen what really goes on, and I'm ready to tell the world what is wrong with the system. The distinctions between government, industry, science, and medicine have become blurred. The distinctions between making a profit and promoting health have become blurred. The problems with the system do not come in the form of Hollywood-style corruption. The problems are much more subtle, and yet much more dangerous. The result is massive amounts of misinformation, for which average American consumers pay twice. They provide the tax money to do the research, and then they provide the money for their health care to treat their largely preventable diseases. This story, starting from my personal background and culminating in a new understanding of nutrition and health, is the subject of this book. 6 years ago at Cornell University, I organized and taught a new elective course called Vegetarian Nutrition. It was the first such course on an American university campus and has been far more successful than I could have imagined. The course focuses on the health value of a plant-based diet. After spending my time at MIT and Virginia Tech, then coming back to Cornell 30 years ago, I was charged with the task of integrating the concepts and principles of chemistry, biochemistry, physiology and toxicology in an upper-level course in nutrition. After 4 decades of scientific research, education, and policy making at the highest levels in our society, I now feel I can adequately integrate these disciplines into a cogent story. That's what I have done for my most recent course, and many of my students tell me that their lives are changed for the better by the end of the semester. That's what I intend to do for you. I hope your life will be changed as well. @_I. The China study. ____. 1 underscore 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 dot underscore 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 underscore. Problems we face. Solutions we need. He who does not know Jude, how can he understand the diseases of man? Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 460 to -357 BC. On a golden morning in 1946, when summer was all tuckered out and fall wanted to be let in, all you could hear on my family's dairy farm was quiet. There was no growl from cars driving by or airplanes burning trails overhead. Just quiet. There were the songbirds, of course, and the cows, and the roosters who would chime in once in a while, but these noises merely filled out the quiet, the peace. Standing on the second floor of our BAM, with the immense brown doors gaping open, allowing the sun to soak through, I was a happy 12-year-old. I had just finished a big country breakfast of eggs, bacon, sausage, fried potatoes and ham with a couple of glasses of whole milk. My mom had cooked a fantastic meal. I had been working up my appetite since 4:30 a.m., when I had gotten up to milk the cows with my father Tom and my brother Jack. My father, then 45, stood with me in the quiet sun. He opened a 50-pound sack of alfalfa seed, dumped all the tiny seeds on the 11-12 the China study wooden barn floor in front of us, and then opened a box containing fine black powder. The powder, he explained, was bacteria that would help the alfalfa grow. They would attach themselves to the seeds and become part of the roots of the growing plant throughout its life. Having had only 2 years of formal education, my father was proud of knowing that the bacteria helped the alfalfa convert nitrogen from the air into protein. The protein, he explained, was good for the cows that would eventually eat it. So our work that morning was to mix the bacteria and the alfalfa seeds before planting. Always curious, one asked my dad why it worked and how. He was glad to explain it, and one was glad to hear it. This was important knowledge for a farm boy. 17 years later, in 1963, my father had his first heart attack. He was 61. At age 70, he died from a second massive coronary. One was devastated. My father, who had stood with my siblings and me for so many days in the quiet countryside, teaching us the things that one still hold dear in life, was gone. Now, after decades of doing experimental research on diet and health, one know that the very disease that killed my father, heart disease, can be prevented, even reversed. Vascular, arteries and heart health is possible without life-threatening surgery and without potentially lethal drugs. 1. Have learned that it can be achieved simply by eating the right food. This is the story of how food can change our lives. 1. Have spent my career in research and teaching, unraveling the complex mystery of why health eludes some and embraces others, and 1 now know that food primarily determines the outcome. This information could not come at a better time. Our healthcare system costs too much, it excludes far too many people, and it does not promote health and prevent disease. Volumes have been written on how the problem might be solved, but progress has been painfully slow. Sickness, anyone. If you are male in this country, the American Cancer Society says that you have a 47% chance of getting cancer. If you are female, you fare a little better, but you still have a whopping 38% lifetime chance of getting cancer. 1. The rates at which we die from cancer are among the highest in the world, and it has been getting worse. Chart 1.1. Despite 30 years of the massively funded war on cancer, we have made little progress. Contrary to what many believe, cancer is not a natural event. Adopting problems we face, solutions we need. Chart 1.1, cancer death rates, per 100,000 people, 1. 250. 200. 150. 100. 50. O-L. 1972 to 1974, 1992 to 1994. D. My female. 13. A healthy diet and lifestyle can prevent the majority of cancers in the United States. Old age can and should be graceful and peaceful. But cancer is only part of a larger picture of disease and death in America. Looking elsewhere, we see that there is an overall pattern of poor health. For example, we are rapidly becoming the heaviest people on earth. Overweight Americans now significantly outnumber those who maintain a healthy weight. As shown in chart L.2, our rates of obesity have been skyrocketing over the past several decades. 2. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, almost a third of the adults 20 years of age and over in this country are obese. 3. One is considered obese if he or she is carrying more than a third of a chart 1.2% obese population. 2. 35. 30. 25. 20. 15. 10. 5. 0. 1976 to 1980, 1988 to 1994, 1999 to 2000. 14. The China study. Person above and beyond a healthy weight. Similarly frightening trends have been occurring in children as young as 2 years of age. 3. Chart 1.3, what is obese? Both sexes. 5 feet 0 inches 153. 5 feet 2 inches 164. 5 feet 4 inches 174. 5 feet 6 inches 185. 5 feet 8 inches 197. 5 feet 10 inches 209. 6 feet 0 inches 221. 6 feet 2 inches 233. But cancer and obesity are not the only epidemics casting a large shadow over American health. Diabetes has also increased in unprecedented proportions. 1 out of 13 Americans now has diabetes. And that ratio continues to rise. If we don't heed the importance of diet, millions of additional Americans will unknowingly develop diabetes and suffer its consequences, including blindness, limb amputation, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and premature death. Despite this, fast food restaurants that serve nutritionally defunct foods are now fixtures in almost every town. We eat out more than ever and speed has taken precedence over quality. As we spend more time watching TV, playing video games and using the computer, we are less physically active. Both diabetes and obesity are merely symptoms of poor health in general. They rarely exist in isolation of other diseases and often forecast deeper, more serious health problems, such as heart disease, cancer and stroke. 2 of the most frightening statistics show that diabetes among people in their 30s has increased 70% in less than 10 years, and the percentage of obese people has nearly doubled in the past 30 years. Such an incredibly fast increase in these signal diseases in America's young to middle-aged population forecasts a healthcare catastrophe in the coming decades. It may become an unbearable burden on a health system that is already strained in countless ways. Problems we face, solutions we need. 15. Diabetes statistics. Percent increase in incidence from 1990 to 19,985. Age 30 to 39, 70%. Age 40 to 49, 40%. Age 50 to 59, 31%. Percent of diabetics who aren't aware of their 3-5, 34%. Diabetes economies 6, heart disease and stroke, blindness, kidney disease, nervous system disorders, dental disease, limb amputation. Annual economic cost of diabetes $98 billion. But the most pervasive killer in our culture is not obesity, diabetes, or cancer. It is heart disease. Heart disease will kill 1 out of every 3 Americans. According to the American Heart Association, over 60 million Americans currently suffer from some form of cardiovascular disease, including high blood pressure, stroke, and heart disease. Like me, you undoubtedly have known someone who died of heart disease. But since my own father died from a heart attack over 30 years ago, a great amount of knowledge has been uncovered in understanding this disease. The most dramatic recent finding is that heart disease can be prevented and even reversed by a healthy diet. 10 people who cannot perform the most basic physical activity because of severe angina can find a new life simply by changing their diets. By embracing this revolutionary information, we could collectively defeat the most dangerous disease in this country. Oops, we didn't mean to have that HAPPENL. As increasing numbers of Americans fall victim to chronic diseases, we hope that our hospitals and doctors will do all that they can to help us. Unfortunately, both the newspapers and the courts are filled with stories and cases that tell us that inadequate care has become the norm. One of the most well-regarded voices representing the medical community, the Journal of the American Medical Association QAMA, included a recent article by Barbara Starfield, MD, stating that physician error, medication error, and adverse events from drugs or surgery kill 225,400 people per year. Chart 1.5, that makes our healthcare system the third leading cause of death in the United States, behind only cancer and heart disease. Chart 1.4.12. 16. The HENA study. Chart 1.4, leading causes of death. 12. Diseases of the heart 710,760. Cancer, malignant 553,091. Medical Corel 225,400. Stroke, cerebrovascular diseases 167,661. Chronic lower respiratory diseases 122,009. Accidents 97,900. Diabetes mellitus 69,301. Influenza and pneumonia 65,313. Alzheimer's disease 49,558. Chart 1.5, death by health Correlli. Medication errors 13,700. Unnecessary surgery for 12,000. Other preventable errors in hospitals 11,20,000. Hospital-borne infections 11,80,000. Adverse drug effects 15,106,000. The last and largest category of deaths in this group are the hospitalized patients who die from the noxious, unintended, and undesired effect of a drug, 15, which occurs at normal doses. 16 Even with the use of approved medicines and correct medication procedures, over 100,000 people die every year from unintended reactions to the medicine that is supposed to be reviving their health. 15 Incidentally, this same report, which summarized and analyzed 39 separate studies, found that almost 7%, 1 out of 15, of all hospitalized patients have experienced a serious adverse drug reaction, one that requires hospitalization, prolongs hospitalization, is permanently disabling, or results in death. 15 These are people who took their medicine as directed. This number does not include the tens of thousands of people who suffer from the incorrect administration and use of these drugs. Nor does it include adverse drug events that are labeled possible effects, or drugs that do. Problems we face, solutions we need. 17. Not accomplish their intended goal. In other words, 1 of 15 is a conservative number. 15. If nutrition were better understood, and prevention and natural treatments were more accepted in the medical community, we would not be pouring so many toxic, potentially lethal drugs into our bodies at the last stage of disease. We would not be frantically searching for the new medicine that alleviates the symptoms but often does nothing to address the fundamental causes of our illnesses. We would not be spending our money developing, patenting, and commercializing magic bullet drugs that often cause additional health problems. The current system has not lived up to its promise. It is time to shift our thinking toward a broader perspective on health, one that includes a proper understanding and use of good nutrition. As I look back on what I've learned, I am appalled that the circumstances surrounding the way in which Americans die are often unnecessarily early, painful, and costly. An expensive grave. We pay more for our health care than any other country in the world. Chart 1.6. We spent over $1 trillion on health care in 1997.17. In fact, the cost of our health is spiraling so far out of control that the Health Care Financing Administration predicted that our system would cost $16 trillion by 2030. 17 costs have so consistently outpaced inflation that we now spend 1 out of every $7 the economy produces on healthcare. Chart 1.7. We have seen almost a 300% increase in expenditures, as a percentage of GDP, in less than 40 years. What is all the extra financing buying? Is it creating health? I say no, and many serious commentators agree. Recently, the health status of 12 countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, and several Western European countries, was compared on the basis of 16 different indicators of healthcare efficacy. 19. Other countries spend, on average, only about one half of what the US spends per capita on healthcare. Isn't it reasonable, therefore, for us to expect our system to rank above theirs? Unfortunately, among these 12 countries, the US system is consistently among the worst performers. Lee, in a separate analysis, the World Health Organization ranked the United States 37th best in the world according to health care system performance. 20. Our healthcare system is clearly not the best. 18. The China study. Chart 1.6, healthcare expenditures per person, 1997 USI 7. Chart 1.7, % of US GOP spent on healthcare A7, 18. In the world, even though we spend, far and away, the most money on it, too often in the United States, a doctor's treatment decisions are made on the basis of money, not health. The consequences of not having health insurance, I suspect, have never been more terrifying, and close to 44 million Americans are uninsured. 21. It's unacceptable to me. Problems we face, solutions we need. 19. That we spend more money on healthcare than any other country on this planet, and we still have tens of millions of people without access to basic care. From 3 perspectives: disease prevalence, medical care efficacy, and economics, we have a deeply troubled medical system. But I do not do justice to this topic simply by recounting figures and statistics. Many of us have spent awful times in hospitals or in nursing homes, watching a loved one succumb to disease. Perhaps you've been a patient yourself, and you know firsthand how poorly the system sometimes functions. Isn't it paradoxical that the system that is supposed to heal us too often hurts us? Working to lessen confusion. The American people need to know the truth. They need to know what we have uncovered in our research. People need to know why we are unnecessarily sick, why too many of us die early despite the billions spent on research. The irony is that the solution is simple and inexpensive. The answer to the American health crisis is the food that each of us chooses to put in our mouths each day. It's as simple as that. Although many of us think we're well informed on nutrition, we're not. We tend to follow one faddish diet after another. We disdain saturated fats, butter, or carbohydrates, and then embrace vitamin E, calcium, supplements, aspirin, or zinc, and focus our energy and effort on extremely specific food components, as if this will unlock the secrets of health. All too often, fancy outweighs fact. Perhaps you remember the protein diet fad that gripped the country in the late 1970s. The promise was that you could lose weight by replacing real food with a protein shake. In a very short while, almost 60 women died from the diet. More recently, millions have adopted high-protein, high-fat diets based on books such as Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution, Protein Power, and the South Beach Diet. There is increasing evidence that these modem protein fads continue to inflict a great variety of dangerous health disorders. What we don't know, what we don't understand about nutrition can hurt us. I've been wrestling with this public confusion for more than 2 decades. In 1988, I was invited before the U.5 Senate Governmental Affairs Committee chaired by Senator John Glenn, to give my views on why the public is so confused about diet and nutrition. After examining this issue, both before and since that testimony, I can confidently state that one of the major sources of confusion is this: far too often, we scientists focus on 20 the China study details while ignoring the larger context. For example, we pin our efforts and our hopes on one isolated nutrient at a time, whether it is vitamin A to prevent cancer or vitamin E to prevent heart attacks. We oversimplify and disregard the infinite complexity of nature, often investigating minute biochemical parts of food and trying to reach broad conclusions about diet and health leads to contradictory results. Contradictory results lead to confused scientists and policymakers, and to an increasingly confused public. A different kind of prescription. Most of the authors of several best-selling nutrition books claim to be researchers, but I am not aware that their research involves original, professionally developed experimentation. That is, they have not designed and conducted studies under the scrutiny of fellow colleagues or peers. They have few or no publications in peer-reviewed scientific journals. They have virtually no formal training in nutritional science. They belong to no professional research societies. They have not participated as peer reviewers. They do, nonetheless, often develop very lucrative projects and products that put money in their pockets while leaving the reader with yet another short-lived and useless diet fad. If you are familiar with the health books at your nearby bookstore, you have likely heard of Dr. Atkins' new diet revolution, the South Beach Diet, Sugar Busters, The Zone, or Eat Right for Your Type. These books have made health information more confusing, more difficult to grasp, and ultimately more elusive. If you aren't fatigued, constipated, or half-starved by these quick-fix plans, your head is spinning from counting calories and measuring grams of carbohydrates, protein, and fat. What's the real problem, anyway? Is it fat? Is it carbohydrates? What's the ratio of nutrients that provides greatest weight loss? Are cruciferous vegetables good for my blood type? Am I taking the right supplements? How much vitamin C do I need every day? Am I in ketosis? How many grams of protein do I need? You get the picture. This is not health. These are fad diets that embody the worst of medicine, science, and the popular media. If you are only interested in a 2-week menu plan to lose weight, then this book is not for you. I am appealing to your intelligence, not to your ability to follow a recipe or menu plan. I want to offer you a more profound and more beneficial way to view health. I have a prescription for maximum health that is simple, easy to follow, and offers more benefits than any drug or surgery, without any of the side effects. This problems we face, solutions we need. 21. Prescription isn't merely a menu plan. It doesn't require daily charts or calorie counting, and it doesn't exist to serve my own financial interests. Most importantly, the supporting evidence is overwhelming. This is about changing the way you eat and live and the extraordinary health that will result. So, what is my prescription for good health? In short, it is about the multiple health benefits of consuming plant-based foods, and the largely unappreciated health dangers of consuming animal-based foods, including all types of meat, dairy, and eggs. I did not begin with preconceived ideas, philosophical or otherwise, to prove the worthiness of plant-based diets. I started at the opposite end of the spectrum, as a meat-loving dairy farmer in my personal life and an establishment scientist in my professional life. I even used to lament the views of vegetarians as I taught nutritional biochemistry to pre-med students. My only interest now is to explain the scientific basis for my views in the clearest way possible. Changing dietary practices will only occur and be maintained when people believe the evidence and experience the benefits. People decide what to eat for a number of reasons, health considerations being only one. My task is only to present the scientific evidence in a form that can be understood. The rest is up to you. The scientific basis for my views is largely empirical, obtained through observation and measurement. It is not illusory, hypothetical, or anecdotal, it is from legitimate research findings. It is a type of science originally advocated 2,400 years ago by the father of medicine, Hippocrates, who said, "There are, in effect, two things, to know and to believe one knows. To know is science. To believe one knows is ignorance." I plan to show you what I have come to know. Much of my evidence comes from human studies done by myself and by my students and colleagues in my research group. These studies were diverse both in design and in purpose. They included an investigation of liver cancer in Philippine children and their consumption of a mold toxin, aflatoxin 22. 23, a nationwide program of self-help nutrition centers for malnourished preschool children in the Philippines. 24, a study of dietary factors affecting bone density and osteoporosis in 800 women in China. 25. 27, a study of biomarkers that characterize the emergence of breast cancer. 28. 29, and a nationwide, comprehensive study of dietary and lifestyle factors associated with disease mortality in 170 villages in mainland China and Taiwan, widely known as the China 5 2D.3033. These studies, exceptionally diverse in scope, dealt with diseases. 22. The China study, thought to be related to varied dietary practices, thus providing the opportunity to investigate diet and disease associations comprehensively. The China study, of which I was director, began in 1983 and is still ongoing. In addition to these human studies, I maintained a 27-year laboratory research program in experimental animal studies. Begun in the late 1960s, this National Institutes of Health, NIH, funded research investigated the link between diet and cancer in considerable depth. Our findings, which were published in the highest quality scientific journals, brought into question the very core principles of cancer causation. When all was said and done, my colleagues and I were honored to have received a total of 74 grant years of funding. In other words, because we had more than one research program being conducted at once, my colleagues and I did 74 years worth of funded research in less than 35 years. From this research I have authored or co-authored over 350 scientific articles. Numerous awards were extended to me and to my students and colleagues for this long series of studies and publications. They included, among others, the 1998 American Institute for Cancer Research Award in recognition of a lifetime of significant accomplishments in scientific research, in diet, nutrition, and cancer, a 1998 award as one of the top 25 food influentials by Self magazine, and the 2004 Burton Coleman Scientific Award by the Natural Nutrition Food Association. Moreover, invitations to lecture at research and medical institutions in more than 40 states and several foreign countries attested to the interest in these findings from the professional communities. My appearance before congressional committees and federal and state agencies also indicated substantial public interest in our findings. Interviews on the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour program, at least 25 other TV programs, lead stories in USA Today, The New York Times, and the Saturday Evening Post, and widely publicized TV documentaries on our work have also been a part of our public activities. The promise of the future. Through all of this, I have come to see that the benefits produced by eating a plant-based diet are far more diverse and impressive than any drug or surgery used in medical practice. Heart diseases, cancers, diabetes, stroke and hypertension, arthritis, cataracts, Alzheimer's disease, IMPO. Problems we face, solutions we need. 23. And all sorts of other chronic diseases can be largely prevented. These diseases, which generally occur with aging and tissue degeneration, kill the majority of us before our time. Additionally, impressive evidence now exists to show that advanced heart disease, relatively advanced cancers of certain types, diabetes, and a few other degenerative diseases can be reversed by diet. I remember when my superiors were only reluctantly accepting the evidence of nutrition being able to prevent heart disease, for example, but vehemently denying its ability to reverse such a disease when already advanced. But the evidence can no longer be ignored. Those in science or medicine who shut their minds to such an idea are being more than stubborn. They are being irresponsible. One of the more exciting benefits of good nutrition is the prevention of diseases that are thought to be due to genetic predisposition. We now know that we can largely avoid these genetic diseases even though we may harbor the gene, or genes, that is, are responsible for the disease. But funding of genetic research continues to spiral upwards in the belief that specific genes account for the occurrence of specific diseases, in the hope that we somehow will be able to turn off these nasty genes. Drug company public relations programs now depict a future where each of us will have a personal ID card cataloging all of our good and bad genes. Using this card, we will be expected to go to our doctor, who will prescribe a single pill to suppress our bad genes. I strongly suspect these miracles will never be realized, or if tried they will have serious unintended consequences. These futuristic pipe dreams obscure the affordable, efficacious health solutions that currently exist, solutions based in nutrition. In my own laboratory we have shown in experimental animals that cancer growth can be turned on and off by nutrition, despite very strong genetic predisposition. We have studied these effects in great detail and have published our findings in the very best scientific journals. As you will see later, these findings are nothing short of spectacular, and the same effects have been indicated over and over again in humans. Eating the right way not only prevents disease but also generates health and a sense of well-being, both physically and mentally. Some world-class athletes, such as Ironman Dave Scott, track stars Carl Lewis and Edwin Moses, tennis great Martina Navratilova, world champion wrestler Chris Campbell, no relation, and 68-year-old marathoner Ruth Heydrich have discovered that consuming a low-fat 24 the China study plant-based diet gives them a significant edge in performance. In the laboratory, we fed experimental rats a diet similar to the usual American fare rich in animal-based protein and compared them with other rats fed a diet low in animal-based protein. Guess what happened when both sets of rats had an opportunity to voluntarily use exercise wheels? Those fed the low animal protein diet exercised substantially more, with less fatigue. than those fed the type of diet that most of us eat. This was the same effect observed by these world-class athletes. This shouldn't be news to the medical establishment. A century ago, Professor Russell Chittenden, a famous, well-established nutrition researcher at Yale University Medical School, investigated whether eating a plant-based diet affected students' physical capacities. 34-35 He fed some students, fellow faculty, and himself a plant-based diet and measured their physical performance tests. He got the same results as our rats. Almost a century later, and they were equally spectacular. Then there is the question of our excessive dependence on drugs and surgery to control our health. In its simplest form, eating the right way would largely obviate the enormous costs of using drugs, as well as their side effects. Fewer people would need to wage lengthy, expensive battles with chronic disease in hospitals over their last years of life. Healthcare costs would drop and medical mistakes would wane as premature death plummeted. In essence, our healthcare system would finally protect and promote our health as it is meant to do. Simple beginnings. As I look back, I often think about life on the farm and how it shaped my thinking in so many ways. My family was immersed in nature every waking moment. In the summer, from sunrise to sunset, we were outdoors planting and harvesting the crops and taking care of the animals. My mother had the best garden in our part of the country and toiled day in and day out during the summer to keep our family well fed with fresh food, all produced on our own farm. I've had an amazing journey, to be sure. I have been startled time and time again by what I have learned. I wish that my family and others around us had had the same information back in the mid-1900s that we now have about food and health. If we had, my father could have prevented, or reversed, his heart disease. He could have met my youngest son, his namesake, who is collaborating with me on this book. He might have lived for several more years with a higher quality of health. Problems we face, solutions we need. 25. My journey in science over the past 45 years has convinced me that it is now more urgent than ever to show how people can avoid these tragedies. The science is there and it must be made known. We cannot let the status quo go unchallenged and watch our loved ones suffer unnecessarily. It is time to stand up, clear the air, and take control of our health. A house of proteins. My entire professional career in biomedical research has centered on protein. Like an invisible leash, protein tethered me wherever I went. From the basic research laboratory to the practical programs of feeding malnourished children in the Philippines to the government boardrooms where our national health policy was being formulated. Protein, often regarded with unsurpassed awe, is the common thread tying together past and present knowledge about nutrition. The story of protein is part science, part culture, and a good dose of mythology. I am reminded of the words of Goethe, first brought to my attention by my friend Howard Lyman, a prominent lecturer, author, and former cattle rancher. We are best at hiding those things which are in plain sight. Nothing has been so well hidden as the untold story of protein. The dogma surrounding protein censures, reproaches, and guides, directly or indirectly, almost every thought we have in biomedical research. Ever since the discovery of this nitrogen-containing chemical in 1839 by the Dutch chemist Gerhard Mulder, protein has loomed as the most sacred of all nutrients. The word protein comes from the Greek word proteios, which means of prime importance. In the 19th century, protein was synonymous with meat and This connection has stayed with us for well over 100 years. Many people today still equate protein with animal-based food. If you were to name the first food that comes to mind when I say protein, you might say beef. If you did, you aren't alone. 27. 28. The China study. Confusion reigns on many of the most basic questions about protein. What are good sources of protein? How much protein should one consume? Is plant protein as good as animal protein? Is it necessary to combine certain plant foods in a meal to get complete proteins? Is it advisable to take protein powders or amino acid supplements? Especially for someone who does vigorous exercise or plays sport. Should one take protein supplements to build muscle? Some protein is considered high quality, some low quality. What does this mean? Where do vegetarians get protein? Can vegetarian children grow properly without animal protein? Fundamental to many of these common questions and concerns is the belief that meat is protein and protein is meat. This belief comes from the fact that the soul of animal-based foods is protein. In many meat and dairy products, we can selectively remove the fat, but we are still left with recognizable meat and dairy products. We do this all the time with lean cuts of meat and skim milk. But if we selectively remove the protein from animal-based foods, we are left with nothing like the original. A non-protein steak, for example, would be a puddle of water, fat and a small amount of vitamins and minerals. Who would eat that? In brief, for a food to be recognized as an animal-based food, it must have protein. Protein is the core element of animal-based foods. Early scientists like Carl Voigt, 1831 to 1908, a prominent German scientist, were staunch champions of protein. Voigt found that man needed only 48.5 grams per day, but nonetheless he recommended a whopping 118 grams per day because of the cultural bias of the time. Protein equaled meat, and everyone aspired to have meat on his or her table, just as we aspire to have bigger houses and faster cars. Voigt figured, you can't get too much of a good thing. Voigt went on to mentor several well-known nutrition researchers of the early 1900s, including Max Rubner, 1854 to 1932, and Wu Atwater, 1844 to 1907. Both students closely followed the advice of their teacher. Rubner stated that protein intake, meaning meat, was a symbol of civilization itself. A large protein allowance is the right of civilized man. Atwater went on to organize the first nutrition laboratory at the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. As director of the USDA, he, a house of proteins 29, recommended 125 grams per day. Only about 55 grams per day is now recommended. Later, we will see how important this early precedent was to this government agency. A cultural bias had become firmly entrenched. If you were civilized, you ate plenty of protein. If you were rich, you ate meat, and if you were poor, you ate staple plant foods like potatoes and bread. The lower classes were considered by some to be lazy and inept as a result of not eating enough meat or protein. Elitism and arrogance dominated much of the burgeoning field of nutrition in the 19th century. The entire concept that bigger is better, more civilized and perhaps even more spiritual permeated every thought about protein. Major Mackay, a prominent English physician in the early 20th century, provided one of the more entertaining, but most unfortunate moments in this history. Physician Mackay was stationed in the English colony of India in 1912 in order to identify good fighting men in the Indian tribes. Among other things, he said that people who consumed less protein were of a poor physique, and a cringing effeminate disposition. Is all that can be expected. Pressing for quality. Protein, fat, carbohydrate and alcohol provide virtually all of the calories that we consume. Fat, carbohydrate and protein, as macronutrients, make up almost all the weight of food, aside from water, with the remaining small amount being the vitamin and mineral micronutrients. The amounts of these latter micronutrients needed for optimum health are tiny, milligrams to micrograms. Protein, the most sacred of all nutrients, is a vital component of our bodies, and there are hundreds of thousands of different kinds. They function as enzymes, hormones, structural tissue, and transport molecules, all of which make life possible. Proteins are constructed as long chains of hundreds or thousands of amino acids, of which there are 15 to 20 different kinds, depending on how they are counted. Proteins wear out on a regular basis and must be replaced. This is accomplished by consuming foods that contain protein. When digested, these proteins give us a whole new supply of amino acid building blocks to use in making new protein replacements for those that wore out. Various food proteins are said to be of different quality, depending on how well they provide the needed amino acids used to replace our body. Proteins. 30. The China study. This process of disassembling and reassembling the amino acids of proteins is like someone giving us a multicolored string of beads to replace an old string of beads that we lost. However, the colored beads on the string given to us are not in the same order as the string we lost. $0. We break the string and collect its beads. Then, we reconstruct our new string so that the colored beads are in the same order as our lost string. But if we are short of blue beads, for example, making our new string is going to be slowed down or stopped until we get more blue beads. This is the same concept as in making new tissue proteins to match our old, worn out proteins. About 8 amino acids, colored beads, that are needed for making our tissue proteins must be provided by the food we eat. They are called essential because our bodies cannot make them. If, like our string of beads, our food protein lacks enough of even one of these 8 essential amino acids, then the synthesis of the new proteins will be slowed down or stopped. This is where the idea of protein quality comes into play. Food proteins of the highest quality are, very simply, those that provide, upon digestion, the right kinds and amounts of amino acids needed to efficiently synthesize our new tissue proteins. This is what that word quality really means. It is the ability of food proteins to provide the right kinds and amounts of amino acids to make our new proteins. Can you guess what food we might eat to most efficiently provide the building blocks for our replacement proteins? The answer is human flesh. Its protein has just the right amount of the needed amino acids. But while our fellow men and women are not for dinner, we do get the next best protein by eating other animals. The proteins of other animals are very similar to our proteins because they mostly have the right amounts of each of the needed amino acids. These proteins can be used very efficiently and therefore are called high quality. Among animal foods, the proteins of milk and eggs represent the best amino acid matches for our proteins, and thus are considered the highest quality, while the lower quality plant proteins may be lacking in one or more of the essential amino acids. As a group they do contain all of them. The concept of quality really means the efficiency with which food proteins are used to promote growth. This would be well and good if the greatest efficiency equaled the greatest health, but it doesn't, and that's why the terms efficiency and quality are misleading. In fact, to give you a taste of what's to come, there is a mountain of compelling research. A House of Proteins 31. Showing that low-quality plant protein, which allows for slow but steady synthesis of new proteins, is the healthiest type of protein. Slow but steady wins the race. The quality of protein found in a specific food is determined by seeing how fast animals would grow while consuming it. Some foods, namely those from animals, emerge with a very high protein efficiency ratio and value. 1. This focus on efficiency of body growth, as if it were good health, encourages the consumption of protein with the highest quality. As any marketer will tell you, a product that is defined as being high quality instantly earns the trust of consumers. For well over 100 years, we have been captive to this misleading language and have oftentimes made the unfortunate leap to thinking that more quality equals more health. The basis for this concept of protein quality was not well known among the public, but its impact was and still is highly significant. People, for example, who choose to consume a plant-based diet will often ask, even today, where do I get my protein? As if plants don't have protein. Even if it is known that plants have protein, there is still the concern about its perceived poor quality. This has led people to believe that they must meticulously combine proteins from different plant sources during each meal so that they can mutually compensate for each other's amino acid deficits. However, this is overstating the case. We now know that through enormously complex metabolic systems, the human body can derive all the essential amino acids from the natural variety of plant proteins that we encounter every day. It doesn't require eating higher quantities of plant protein or meticulously planning every meal. Unfortunately, the enduring concept of protein quality has greatly obscured this information. The protein gap. The most important issue in nutrition and agriculture during my early career was figuring out ways to increase the consumption of protein. Making sure it was of the highest possible quality, my colleagues and I all believed in this common goal. From my early years on the farm to my graduate education, I accepted this virtual reverence for protein. As a youngster, I remember that the most expensive part of farm animal feed was the protein supplements that we fed to our cows and pigs. Then, at graduate school, I spent 3 years, 1958 to 1961, doing my PhD research trying to improve the supply of high-quality protein by growing cows and sheep more efficiently so we could eat more of them. 2.3. 32 The China Study. I went all the way through my graduate studies with a profound belief that promoting high-quality protein, as in animal-based foods, was a very important task. My graduate research, although cited a few times over the next decade or so, was only a small part of much larger efforts by other research groups to address a protein situation worldwide. During the 1960s and 1970s, I was to hear over and over again about a so-called protein gap in the developing world. Point 4. The protein gap stipulated that world hunger and malnutrition among children in the third world was a result of not having enough protein to consume, especially high quality, i.e. animal, protein. 4,5. According to this view, those in the third world were especially deficient in high quality protein, or animal protein. Projects were springing up all over the place to address this protein gap problem. A prominent MIT professor and his younger colleague concluded in 1976 that an adequate supply of protein is a central aspect of the world food problem. 5 and further that unless desirably supplemented by modest amounts of milk, eggs, meat or fish, the predominantly cereal diets of poor nations are deficient in protein for growing children. To address this dire problem, MIT was developing a protein-rich food supplement called Incaparina. Purdue University was breeding corn to contain more lysine, the deficient amino acid in corn protein. The US government was subsidizing the production of dried milk powder to provide high-quality protein for the world's poor. Cornell University was providing a wealth of talent to the Philippines to help develop both a high-protein rice variety and a livestock industry. Auburn University and MIT were grinding up fish to produce fish protein concentrate to feed the world's poor. The United Nations, the US government Food for Peace program, major universities and countless other organizations and universities were taking up the battle cry to eradicate world hunger with high-quality protein. I knew most of the projects firsthand, as well as the individuals who organized and directed them. The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAA, of the United Nations exerts considerable influence in developing countries through their agriculture development programs. 2 of its staffers 6 declared in 1970. A House of Proteins 33. That, by and large, the lack of protein is without question the most serious qualitative deficiency in the nutrition of developing countries. The great mass of the population of these countries subsists mainly on foods derived from plants frequently deficient in protein, which results in poor health and low productivity per man. M. Otrid, a very influential man from the FAO, added that owing to the low animal protein content of the diet and lack of diversity of supplies in developing countries, protein quality is unsatisfactory, for he reported on a very strong association between consumption of animal-based foods and annual income. Otrid strongly advocated increasing the production and consumption of animal protein in order to meet the growing protein gap in the world. He also advocated that all resources of science and technology must be mobilized to create new protein-rich foods or to derive the utmost benefits from hitherto insufficiently utilized resources to feed mankind. 4. Bruce Stillings at the University of Maryland and the U.S. Department of Commerce, another proponent of consuming animal-based diets, admitted in 1973 that although there is no requirement for animal protein in the diet per se, the quantity of dietary protein from animal sources is usually accepted as being indicative of the overall protein quality of the diet. 1. He went on to say that the supply of adequate quantities of animal products is generally recognized as being an ideal way to improve world protein nutrition. Of course, it's quite correct that a supply of protein can be an important way of improving nutrition in the third world, particularly if populations are getting all of their calories from one plant source. But it's not the only way, and, as we shall see, it isn't necessarily the way most consistent with long-term health. Feeding the children. So this was the climate at that time, and I was a part of it as much as anyone else. I left MIT to take a faculty position at Virginia Tech in 1965. Professor Charlie Engel, who was then the head of the Department of Biochemistry and Nutrition at Virginia Tech, had considerable interest in developing an international nutrition program for malnourished children. He was interested in implementing a Mothercraft self-help project in the Philippines. This project was called Mothercraft because it focused on educating mothers of malnourished children. The idea was that if mothers were taught that the right kinds of locally grown foods can 34 The China study make their children well, they would not have to rely on scarce medicines and the mostly non-existent doctors. Engel started the program in 1967 and invited me to be his campus coordinator and to come for extended stays in the Philippines while he resided full-time in Manila. Consistent with the emphasis on protein as a means of solving malnutrition, we had to make this nutrient the centerpiece of our educational mothercraft centers and thereby help to increase protein consumption. Fish as a source of protein was mostly limited to the seacoast areas. Our own preference was to develop peanuts as a source of protein, because this was a crop that could be grown most anywhere. The peanut is a legume like alfalfa, soybeans, clover, peas, and other beans. Like these other nitrogen fixers, peanuts are rich in protein. There was, however, a nagging problem with these tasty legumes. Considerable evidence had been emerging, first from England 7, 9 and later from MIT, the same lab that I had worked in, 10, 11 to show that peanuts often were contaminated with a fungus-produced toxin called aflatoxin, AF. It was an alarming problem because AF was being shown to cause liver cancer in rats. It was said to be the most potent chemical carcinogen ever discovered. So we had to tackle two closely related projects: alleviate childhood malnutrition and resolve the AF contamination problem. Prior to going to the Philippines, I had traveled to Haiti in order to observe a few experimental mothercraft centers organized by my colleagues at Virginia Tech, Professors Ken King and Ryland Webb. It was my first trip to an underdeveloped country, and Haiti certainly fit the bill. Papa Doc Duvalier, president of Haiti, extracted what little resources the country had for his own rich lifestyle. In Haiti at that time, 54% of the children were dead before reaching their 5th birthday, largely because of malnutrition. I subsequently went to the Philippines and encountered more of the same. We decided where mothercraft centers were to be located based on how much malnutrition was present in each village. We focused our efforts on the villages in most need. In a preliminary survey in each village, barrio, children were weighed and their weight for age was compared with a Western reference standard, which was subdivided into first, second, and third degree malnutrition. Third degree malnutrition, the worst kind, represented children under the 65th percentile. Keep in mind that a child at the LOF percentile represents only the average for the US. Being less than the 65th percentile means near starvation. A house of proteins 35. In the urban areas of some of the big cities, as many as 15 to 20% of the children aged 3 to 6 years were judged to be third degree. I can so well remember some of my initial observations of these children. A mother, hardly more than a wisp herself, holding her 3-year-old. Twins with bulging eyes, one at 11 pounds, the other at 14 pounds, trying to get them to open their mouths to eat some porridge. Older children blind from malnutrition, being led around by their younger siblings to seek a handout. Children without legs or arms hoping to get a morsel of food. A revelation to die for. Needless to say, those sights gave us ample motivation to press ahead with our project. As I mentioned before, we first had to resolve the problem of AF contamination in peanuts, our preferred protein food. The first step of investigating AF was to gather some basic information. Who in the Philippines was consuming AF, and who was subject to liver cancer? To answer these questions, I applied for and received a National Institutes of Health, NIH, research grant. We also adopted a second strategy by asking another question: how does AF actually affect liver cancer? We wanted to study this question at the molecular level using laboratory rats. I succeeded in getting a second NIH grant for this in-depth biochemical research. These 2 grants initiated a 2-track research investigation, one basic and one applied, which was to continue for the rest of my career. I found studying questions both from the basic and applied perspectives rewarding because it tells us not only the impact of a food or chemical on health, but also why it has that impact. In so doing, we could better understand not only the biochemical foundation of food and health, but also how it might relate to people in everyday life. We began with a stepwise series of surveys. First, we wanted to know which foods contain the most AF. We learned that peanuts and corn were the foods most contaminated. All 29 jars of peanut butter we had purchased in the local groceries, for example, were contaminated, with levels of AF as much as 300 times the amount judged to be acceptable in U.S. food. Whole peanuts were much less contaminated. None exceeded the AF amounts allowed in U.S. commodities. This disparity between peanut butter and whole peanuts originated at the peanut factory. The best peanuts, which filled cocktail jars, were hand selected from a moving conveyor belt, leaving the worst, moldiest nuts to be delivered to the end of the belt to make peanut butter. 36. The China study. Our second question concerned who was most susceptible to this AF contamination and its cancer-producing effects. We learned that it was children. They were the ones consuming the AF-iast peanut butter. We estimated AF consumption by analyzing the excretion of AF metabolic products in the urine of children living in homes with a partially consumed peanut butter jar. 12. As we gathered this information, an interesting pattern emerged. The 2 areas of the country with the highest rates of liver cancer, the cities of Manila and Cebu, also were the same areas where the most AF was being consumed. Peanut butter was almost exclusively consumed in the Manila area, while corn was consumed in Cebu, the second most populated city in the Philippines. But, as it turned out, there was more to this story. It emerged from my making the acquaintance of a prominent doctor, Dr. Jose Cito, who was an advisor to President Marcos. He told me that the liver cancer problem in the Philippines was quite serious. What was so devastating was that the disease was claiming the lives of children before the age of 10. Whereas in the West, this disease mostly strikes people only after 40 years of age. Cito told me that he had personally operated on children younger than 4 years of age for liver cancer. That alone was incredible, but what he then told me was even more striking. Namely, the children who got liver cancer were from the best fed families. The families with the most money ate what we thought were the healthiest diets, the diets most like our own meaty American diets. They consumed more protein than anyone else in the country, high quality animal protein, at that, and yet they were the ones getting liver cancer. How could this be? Worldwide, liver cancer rates were highest in countries with the lowest average protein intake. It was therefore widely believed that this cancer was the result of a deficiency in protein. Further, the deficiency problem was a major reason we were working in the Philippines to increase the consumption of protein by as many malnourished children as possible. But now Dr. Cito and his colleagues were telling me that the most protein-rich children had the highest rates of liver cancer. This seemed strange to me, at first, but over time my own information increasingly confirmed their observations. At that time, a research paper from India surfaced in an obscure medical journal. 13. Protein. It was an experiment involving liver cancer and protein consumption in 2 groups of laboratory rats. One group was given AF and then fed diets containing 20% protein. The second group was given the same level of AF and then fed diets containing only 5% protein. A house of proteins 37. Every single rat fed 20% protein got liver cancer or its precursor lesions. But not a single animal fed a 5% protein diet got liver cancer or its precursor lesions. It was not a trivial difference, it was 100% versus 0%. This was very much consistent with my observations for the Philippine children. Those who were most vulnerable to liver cancer were those who consumed diets higher in protein. No one seemed to accept the report from India. On a flight from Detroit after returning from a presentation at a conference, I traveled with a former but much senior colleague of mine from MIT, Professor Paul Newburn. At the time, Newburn was one of the only people who had given much thought to the role of nutrition in the development of cancer. I told him about my impressions in the Philippines and the paper from India. He summarily dismissed the paper by saying, "They must have gotten the numbers on the animal cages reversed. In no way could a high-protein diet increase the development of cancer." I realized that I had encountered a provocative idea that stimulated disbelief, even the ire of fellow colleagues. Should I take seriously the observation that protein increased cancer development and run the risk of being thought a fool? Or should I turn my back on this story? In some ways it seemed that this moment in my career had been foreshadowed by events in my personal life. When I was 5 years old, my aunt who was living with us was dying of cancer. On several occasions, my uncle took my brother Jack and me to see his wife in the hospital. Although I was too young to understand everything that was happening, I do remember being struck by the big C word, cancer. I would think, when I get big, I want to find a cure for cancer. Many years later, just a few years after getting married, at about the time when I was starting my work in the Philippines, my wife's mother was dying of colon cancer at the young age of 51. At that time, I was becoming aware of a possible diet-cancer connection in our early research. Her case was particularly difficult because she did not receive appropriate medical care due to the fact that she did not have health insurance. My wife Karen was her only daughter and they had a very close relationship. These difficult experiences were making my career choice easy. I would go wherever our research led me to help get a better understanding of this horrific disease. Looking back on it, this was the beginning of my career focus on diet and cancer. The moment of deciding to investigate protein and cancer was the turning point. If I wanted to stay with this story, there was only 38 the China study. One solution: start doing fundamental laboratory research to see not only if, but also how, consuming more protein leads to more cancer. That's exactly what I did. It took me farther than I had ever imagined. The extraordinary findings my colleagues, students, and I generated just might make you think twice about your current diet. But even more than that, the findings led to broader questions that would eventually lead to cracks in the very foundations of nutrition and health. The nature of science: what you need to know to follow the research. Proof in science is elusive. Even more than in the core sciences of biology, chemistry, and physics, establishing absolute proof in medicine and health is nearly impossible. The primary objective of research investigation is to determine only what is likely to be true. This is because research into health is inherently statistical. When you throw a ball in the air, will it come down? Yes, every time. That's physics. If you smoke 4 packs a day, will you get lung cancer? The answer is maybe. We know that your odds of getting lung cancer are much higher than if you didn't smoke, and we can tell you what those odds, statistics, are, but we can't know with certainty whether you as an individual will get lung cancer. In nutrition research, untangling the relationship between diet and health is not so straightforward. Humans live all sorts of different ways, have different genetic backgrounds, and eat all sorts of different foods. Experimental limitations such as cost restraints, time constraints, and measurement error are significant obstacles. Perhaps most importantly, food, lifestyle, and health interact through such complex, multifaceted systems that establishing proof for any one factor and any one disease is nearly impossible, even if you had the perfect set of subjects, unlimited time, and unlimited financial resources. Because of these difficulties, we do research using many different strategies. In some cases, we assess whether a hypothetical cause produces a hypothetical effect by observing and measuring the differences that already exist between different groups of people. We might observe and compare societies who consume different amounts of fat, then observe whether these differences correspond to similar differences in the rates of breast cancer or osteoporosis or some other disease condition. We might observe and compare the dietary characteristics of people who already have the disease with a comparable group of people who don't have the disease. We might observe and compare disease rates in 1950. A House of Proteins 39. With disease rates in 1990, then observe whether any changes in disease rates correspond to dietary changes. In addition to observing what already exists, we might do an experiment and intentionally intervene with a hypothetical treatment to see what happens. We intervene, for example, when testing for the safety and efficacy of drugs. One group of people is given the drug and a second group a placebo, an inactive look-alike substance to please the patient. Intervening with diet, however, is far more difficult, especially if people aren't confined to a clinical setting, because then we must rely on everyone to faithfully use the specified diets. As we do observational and interventional research, we begin to amass the findings and weigh the evidence for or against a certain hypothesis. When the weight of the evidence favors an idea so strongly that it can no longer be plausibly denied, we advance the idea as a likely truth. It is in this way that I am advancing an argument for a whole foods, plant-based diet. As you continue reading, realize that those seeking absolute proof of optimal nutrition in 1 or 2 studies will be disappointed and confused. However, I am confident that those seeking the truth regarding diet and health by surveying the weight of the evidence from the variety of available studies will be amazed and enlightened. There are several ideas to keep in mind when determining the weight of the evidence, including the following ideas: correlation versus causation. In many studies, you will find that the words correlation and association are used to describe a relationship between 2 factors, perhaps even indicating a cause and effect relationship. This idea is featured prominently in the China study. We observed whether there were patterns of associations for different dietary, lifestyle, and disease characteristics within the survey of 65 counties, 130 villages, and 6,500 adults and their families. If protein consumption, for example, is higher among populations that have a high incidence of liver cancer, we can say that protein is positively correlated or associated with liver cancer incidence. As one goes up the Other goes up. If protein intake is higher among populations that have a low incidence of liver cancer, we can say that protein is inversely associated with liver cancer incidence. In other words, the two factors go in the opposite direction. As one goes up, the other goes down. In our hypothetical example, if protein is correlated with liver cancer incidence, this does not prove that protein causes or prevents liver. 40. The China study. Cancer. A classic illustration of this difficulty is that countries with more telephone poles often have a higher incidence of heart disease, and many other diseases. Therefore, telephone poles and heart disease are positively correlated. But this does not prove that telephone poles cause heart disease. In effect, correlation does not equal causation. This does not mean that correlations are useless. When they are properly interpreted, correlations can be effectively used to study nutrition and health relationships. The China study, for example, has over 8,000 statistically significant correlations, and this is of immense value. When so many correlations like this are available, researchers can begin to identify patterns of relationships between diet, lifestyle, and disease. These patterns, in turn, are representative of how diet and health processes, which are unusually complex, truly operate. However, if someone wants proof that a single factor causes a single outcome, a correlation is not good enough. Statistical significance. You might think that deciding whether or not two factors are correlated is obvious, either they are or they aren't. But that isn't the case. When you are looking at a large quantity of data, you have to undertake a statistical analysis to determine if two factors are correlated. The answer isn't yes or no. It's a probability, which we call statistical significance. Statistical significance is a measure of whether an observed experimental effect is truly reliable or whether it is merely due to the play of chance. If you flip a coin 3 times and it lands on heads each time, it's probably chance. If you flip it 100 times and it lands on heads each time, you can be pretty sure the coin has heads on both sides. That's the concept behind statistical significance. It's the odds that the correlation or other finding is real, that it isn't just random chance. A finding is said to be statistically significant when there is less than 5% probability that it is due to chance. This means, for example, that there is a 95% chance that we will get the same result if the study is repeated. This 95% cutoff point is arbitrary, but it is the standard, nonetheless. Another arbitrary cutoff point is 99%. In this case, when the result meets this test, it is said to be highly statistically significant. In the discussions of diet and disease research in this book, statistical significance pops up from time to time, and it can be used to help judge the reliability, or weight, of the evidence. A House of Proteins. 41. Mechanisms of action. Oftentimes correlations are considered more reliable if other research shows that two correlated factors are biologically related. For example, telephone poles and heart disease are positively correlated, but there is no research that shows how telephone poles are biologically related to heart disease. However, there is research that shows the processes by which protein intake and liver cancer might be biologically and causally related, as you will see in Chapter 3. Knowing the process by which something works in the body means knowing its mechanism of action. And knowing its mechanism of action strengthens the evidence. Another way of saying this is that the two correlated factors are related in a biologically plausible way. If a relationship is biologically plausible, it is considered much more reliable. Meta-analysis. Finally, we should understand the concept of a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis tabulates the combined data from multiple studies and analyzes them as one data set. By accumulating and analyzing a large body of combined data, the result can have considerably more weight. Meta-analysis findings are therefore more substantial than the findings of single research studies, although, as with everything else, there may be exceptions. After obtaining the results from a variety of studies, we can then begin to use these tools and concepts to assess the weight of the evidence. Through this effort, we can begin to understand what is most likely to be true, and we can behave accordingly. Alternative hypotheses no longer seem plausible, and we can be very confident in the result. Absolute proof, in the technical sense, is unattainable and unimportant. But common sense proof, 99% certainty, is attainable and critical. For example, it was through this process of interpreting research that we formed our beliefs regarding smoking and health. Smoking has never been 100% proven to cause lung cancer, but the odds that smoking is unrelated to lung cancer are so astronomically low that the matter has long been considered settled. 3. Turning off cancer. Americans dread cancer more than any other disease. Slowly and painfully being consumed by cancer for months, even years, before passing away is a terrifying prospect. This is why cancer is perhaps the most feared of the major diseases. So when the media reports a newly found chemical carcinogen, the public takes notice and reacts quickly. Some carcinogens cause outright panic. Such was the case a few years ago with Aller, a chemical that was routinely sprayed on apples as a growth regulator. Shortly after a report from the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, titled Intolerable Risk, Pesticides in Our Children's Food, the television program 60 Minutes aired a segment on Aller. In February 1989, a representative of NRDC said on CBS's 60 Minutes that the apple industry chemical was the most potent carcinogen in the food supply. 2,3. The public reaction was swift. One woman called state police to chase down a school bus to confiscate her child's apple. 4 school systems across the country, in New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Chicago, among others, stopped serving apples and apple products. According to John Rice, former chairman of the U.S. Apple Association, the apple industry took an economic walloping, losing over $250 million. Finally, in response to the public outcry, the production and use of Aller came to a halt in June of 1989. 3. The Aller story is not uncommon. Over the past several decades, several chemicals have been identified in the popular press as cancer-causing agents. You may have heard of some. 43. 44. The China study. Aminotriazole, herbicide used on cranberry crops, causing the cranberry scare of 1959. DDT, widely known after Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. Nitrites, a meat preservative and color and flavor enhancer used in hot dogs and bacon. Red dye number 2. Artificial sweeteners, including cyclamates and saccharin. Dioxin, a contaminant of industrial processes and of Agent Orange, a defoliant used during the Vietnam War. Aflatoxin, a fungal toxin found on moldy peanuts and corn. I know these unsavory chemicals quite well. I was a member of the National Academy of Sciences expert panel on saccharin and food safety policy, 1978 to 79, which was charged with evaluating the potential danger of saccharin at a time when the public was up in arms after the FDA proposed banning the artificial sweetener. I was one of the first scientists to isolate dioxin. I have first-hand knowledge of the MIT lab that did the key work on nitrites, and I spent many years researching and publishing on aflatoxin, one of the most carcinogenic chemicals ever discovered, at least for rats. But while these chemicals are significantly different in their properties, they all have a similar story with regard to cancer. In each and every case, research has demonstrated that these chemicals may increase cancer rates in experimental animals. The case of nitrites serves as an excellent example. The hot dog missile. If you hazard to call yourself middle-aged or older, when I say nitrites, hot dogs and cancer, you might rock back in your chair, nod your head, and say, "Oh yeah, I remember something about that." 4. The younger folks, well, listen up, because history has a funny way of repeating itself. The time, the early 1970s. The scene, the Vietnam War was beginning to wind down. Richard Nixon was about to be forever linked to Watergate. The energy crisis was about to create lines at gas stations, and nitrite was becoming a headline word. Sodium nitrite, a meat preservative used since the 1920s. 6. It kills bacteria and adds a happy pink color and desirable taste to hot dogs, bacon, and canned meat. Turning off cancer. 45. In 1970, the journal Nature reported that the nitrite we consume may be reacting in our bodies to form nitrosamines. 7. Nitrosamines, a scary family of chemicals. No fewer than 17 nitrosamines are reasonably anticipated to be human carcinogens by the U.S. National Toxicology Program. 8. Hold on a second. Why are these scary nitrosamines anticipated to be human carcinogens? The short answer, animal experiments have shown that as chemical exposure increases, incidence of cancer also increases. But that's not adequate. We need a more complete answer. Let's look at one nitrosamine, NSAR, N-nitrososarcosine. In one study, 20 rats were divided into 2 groups, each exposed to a different level of NSAR. The high-dose rats were given twice the amount that the low-dose rats received. Of rats given the lower level of NSAR, just over 35% of them died from throat cancer. Of rats given the higher levels, 100% died of cancer during the second year of the experiment. 9. 11. How much NSAR did the rats get? Both groups of rats were given an incredible amount. Let me translate the low dose by giving you a little scenario. Let's say you go over to your friend's house to eat every meal. This friend is sick of you and wants to give you throat cancer by exposing you to NSAR. So he gives you the equivalent of the low level given to the rats. You go to his house, and your friend offers you a bologna sandwich that has a whole pound of bologna on it. You eat it. He offers you another, and another, and another. You'll have to eat 270,000 bologna sandwiches before your friend lets you leave. 9. 12. You better like bologna, because your friend is going to have to feed you this way every day for over 30 years. If he does this, you will have had about as much exposure to NSAR per body weight as the rats in the low-dose group. Because higher cancer rates were also seen in mice as well as rats, using a variety of methods of exposure, NSAR is reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. Although no human studies were used to make this evaluation, it is likely that a chemical such as this, which consistently causes cancer in both mice and rats, can cause cancer in humans at some level. It is impossible to know, however, what this level of exposure might be, especially because the animal dosages are so astronomical. Nonetheless, animal experiments alone are considered enough to conclude that NSAR is reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. 46 The China study. So, in 1970, when an article in the prestigious journal Nature concluded that nitrites help to form nitrosamines in the body, thereby implying that they help to cause cancer, people became alarmed. Here was the official line: reduction of human exposure to nitrites and certain secondary amines, particular 1Y in foods, may result in a decrease in the incidence of human cancer. 7 Suddenly nitrites became a potential killer. Because we humans get exposed to nitrites through consumption of processed meat such as hot dogs and bacon, some products came under fire. Hot dogs were an easy target. Besides containing additives like nitrites, hot dogs can be made out of ground up lips, snouts, spleens, tongues, throats, and other variety meats. 13 So as the nitrosamine issue heated up, hot dogs weren't looking so hot. Ralph Nader had called hot dogs among America's deadliest missiles. 14 Some consumer advocacy groups were calling for a nitrite additive ban, and government officials began a serious review of nitrite's potential health problems. 3. The issue jolted forward again in 1978, when a study at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, found that nitrite increased lymphatic cancer in rats. The study, as reported in a 1979 issue of Science, 15, found that, on average, rats fed nitrite got lymphatic cancer 10.2% of the time, while animals not fed nitrite got cancer only 5.4% of the time. This finding was enough to create a public uproar. Fierce debate ensued in the government, industry, and research communities. When the dust settled, expert panels made recommendations, industry cut back on nitrite usage, and the issue fell out of the spotlight. To summarize the story, marginal scientific results can make very big waves in the public when it comes to cancer-causing chemicals. A rise in cancer incidence from 5% to 10% in rats fed large quantities of nitrite caused an explosive controversy. Undoubtedly millions of dollars were spent following the MIT study to investigate and discuss the findings. An NSAR, a nitrosamine possibly formed from nitrite, was reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen after several animal experiments, where exceptionally high levels of chemical were fed to animals for almost half their lifespan. Back to protein. The point isn't that nitrite is safe. It is the mere possibility, however unlikely it may be, that it could cause cancer that alarms the public. But what if researchers produced considerably more impressive scientific turning off cancer 47 results that were far more substantial? What if there was a chemical that experimentally turned on cancer in 100% of the test animals and its relative absence limited cancer to 0% of the animals? Furthermore, what if this chemical were capable of acting in this way at routine levels of intake, and not the extraordinary levels used in the NSAR experiments? Finding such a chemical would be the holy grail of cancer research. The implications for human health would be enormous. One would assume that this chemical would be of considerably more concern than nitrite and aller, and even more significant than aflatoxin, a highly ranked carcinogen. This is exactly what I saw in the Indian research paper 16 when I was in the Philippines. The chemical was protein, fed to rats at levels that are well within the range of normal consumption. Protein. These results were more than startling. In the Indian study, when all the rats had been predisposed to get liver cancer after being given aflatoxin, only the animals fed 20% protein got the cancer while those fed 5% got none. Scientists, myself included, tend to be a skeptical bunch, especially when confronted with eye-popping results. In fact, it is our responsibility as researchers to question and explore such provocative findings. We might suspect that this finding was unique to rats exposed to aflatoxin, and for no other species, including humans. Maybe there were other unknown nutrients that were affecting the data. Maybe my friend, the distinguished MIT professor, was right. Maybe the animal identities in the Indian study got mixed up. The questions begged for answers. To further study this question, I sought and received the two National Institutes of Health, NIH, research grants that I mentioned earlier. One was for a human study, the other for an experimental animal study. I did not cry wolf in either application by suggesting that protein might promote cancer. I had everything to lose and nothing to gain by acting like a heretic. Besides, I wasn't convinced that protein actually might be harmful. In the experimental animal study, I proposed to investigate the effect of various factors, my italics, on aflatoxin metabolism. The human study mostly focused on aflatoxin's effects on liver cancer in the Philippines, was briefly reviewed in the last chapter and was concluded after 3 years. It was later renewed in a much more sophisticated study in China. Chapter 4. A study of this protein effect on tumor development had to be done extremely well. Anything less would not have convinced anyone, especially my peers who would review my future request for renewed funding. In 48 THECHINA STU DY. Hindsight, we must have succeeded. The NIH funding for this study continued for the next 19 years and led to additional funding from other research agencies, American Cancer Society, the American Institute for Cancer Research and the Cancer Research Foundation of America. On these experimental animal findings alone, this project gave rise to more than 100 scientific papers published in some of the best journals, many public presentations and several invitations to participate on expert panels. Animal rights. The rest of this chapter concerns experimental animal research, all of which included rodents, rats and mice. I know well that many oppose the use of experimental animals in research. I respect this concern. I respectfully suggest, however, that you consider this. Very likely, I would not be advocating a plant-based diet today if it were not for these animal experiments. The findings and the principles derived from these animal studies greatly contributed to my interpretations of my later work, including the China study. As you will come to see, one obvious question regarding this issue is whether there was an alternative way to get the same information without using experimental animals. To date, I have found none, even after seeking advice from my animal rights colleagues. These experimental animal studies elaborated some very important principles of cancer causation not obtainable in human-based studies. These principles now have enormous potential to benefit all of our fellow creatures, our environment, and ourselves. 3 stages of cancer. Cancer proceeds through 3 stages: initiation, promotion, and progression. To use a rough analogy, the cancer process is similar to planting a lawn. Initiation is when you put the seeds in the soil. Promotion is when The grass starts to grow, and progression is when the grass gets completely out of control, invading the driveway, the shrubbery, and the sidewalk. So what is the process that successfully implants the grass seed in the soil in the first place, i.e., initiates cancer-prone cells? Chemicals that do this are called carcinogens. These chemicals are most often turning off cancer. 49. Chart 3.1, tumor initiation by aflatoxin inside a liver cell. 4. It attacks the cell's DNA. 5. Most damaged DNA is repaired. But sometimes, cancer initiation. Cancerous OJ. 6. A cell multiplies before the damaged DNA is repaired and permanently damaged cancerous cells arise. After entering our cells, step 1, most carcinogens do not, themselves, initiate the cancer process. They first must be converted to products that are more reactive, steps 2 and 3, with the help of critically important enzymes. These carcinogen products then bind tightly to the cell's DNA to form carcinogen DNA complexes, or adducts, step 4. Unless repaired or removed, carcinogen DNA adducts have the potential to create chaos with the genetic workings of the cell. But nature is smart. These adducts can be repaired. And most adducts are repaired fairly quickly, step 5. However, if they remain in place while cells are dividing to form new daughter cells, genetic damage occurs, and this new genetic defect, or mutation, is passed on to all new cells formed thereafter, step 6. 17. The byproducts of industrial processes, although small amounts may be formed in nature, as is the case with aflatoxin. These carcinogens genetically transform, or mutate, normal cells into cancer-prone cells. A mutation involves permanent alteration of the genes of the cell, with damage to its DNA. The entire initiation stage, chart 3.1, can take place in a very short period of time, even minutes. It is the time required for the chemical carcinogen to be consumed, absorbed into the blood, transported into cells, changed into its active product, bonded to DNA and passed on to the daughter cells. When the new daughter cells are formed, the process is complete. These daughter cells and all their progeny will forever be genetically damaged, giving rise to the potential for cancer. Except in rare instances, completion of the initiation phase is considered irreversible. 50. The China study. At this point in our lawn analogy, the grass seeds have been put in the soil and are ready to germinate. Initiation is complete. The second growth stage is called promotion. Like seeds ready to sprout blades of grass and turn into a green lawn, our newly formed cancer-prone cells are ready to grow and multiply until they become a visibly detectable cancer. This stage occurs over a far longer period of time than initiation, often many years for humans. It is when the newly initiated cluster multiplies and grows into larger and larger masses and a clinically visible tumor is formed. But just like seeds in the soil, the initial cancer cells will not grow and multiply unless the right conditions are met. The seeds in the soil, for example, need a healthy amount of water, sunlight, and other nutrients before they make a full lawn. If any of these factors are denied or are missing, the seeds will not grow. If any of these factors are missing after growth starts, the new seedlings will become dormant, while awaiting further supply of the missing factors. This is one of the most profound features of promotion. Promotion is reversible, depending on whether the early cancer growth is given the right conditions in which to grow. This is where certain dietary factors become so important. These dietary factors, called promoters, feed cancer growth. Other dietary factors, called anti-promoters, slow cancer growth. Cancer growth flourishes when there are more promoters than anti-promoters. When anti-promoters prevail, cancer growth slows or stops. It is a push-pull process. The profound importance of this reversibility cannot be overemphasized. The third phase, progression, begins when a bunch of advanced cancer cells progress in their growth until they have done their final damage. It is like the fully grown lawn invading everything around it, the garden, driveway and sidewalk. Similarly, a developing cancer tumor may wander away from its initial site in the body and invade neighboring or distant tissues. When the cancer takes on these deadly properties, it is considered malignant. When it actually breaks away from its initial home and wanders, it is metastasizing. This final stage of cancer results in death. At the start of our research, the stages of cancer formation were known only in vague outline. But we knew enough about these stages of cancer to be able to structure our research more intelligently. We had no shortage of questions. Could we confirm the findings from India that a low-protein diet represses tumor formation? More importantly, why does protein affect the cancer process? What are the mechanisms? That is, how does protein work? With plenty of questions to be answered, we, turning off Cancer 51, went about our experimental studies meticulously and in depth in order to obtain results that would withstand the harshest of scrutiny. Protein and initiation. How does protein intake affect cancer initiation? Our first test was to see whether protein intake affected the enzyme principally responsible for aflatoxin metabolism, the mixed function oxidase, MFA. This enzyme is very complex because it also metabolizes pharmaceuticals and other chemicals, friend or foe to the body. Paradoxically, this enzyme both detoxifies and activates aflatoxin. It is an extraordinary transformation substance. The enzyme UFACTORY 1. Aflatoxin, AF, enters the cell. 2. AF is metabolized by an enzyme. In a simplistic way, the MFO enzyme system can be thought of as a factory within the industrious workings of the cell. Various chemical raw materials are fed into the factory, where all the complex reactions are performed. The raw materials may be disassembled or assembled. After a transforming process, the raw material chemicals are ready to be shipped out of the factory as mostly normal, safe products. But there also may be byproducts of these complex processes that are exceptionally dangerous. Think of the smokestack at a real-life factory. If someone told you to stick your face down a smokestack and breathe deeply for a couple hours, you'd refuse. Within the cell, the dangerous byproducts, if not held in check, are the highly reactive aflatoxin metabolites that go on to attack the cell's DNA and damage its genetic blueprint. 52. The China study. At the time we started our research, we hypothesized that the protein we consume alters tumor growth by changing how aflatoxin is detoxified by the enzymes present in the liver. We initially determined whether the amount of protein that we eat could change this enzyme activity. After a series of experiments, chart 3.218, the answer was clear. Enzyme activity could be easily modified simply by changing the level of protein intake. 1. S21. Decreasing protein intake like that done in the original research in India, 20% to 5%, not only greatly decreased enzyme activity, but did so very quickly. 22. What does this mean? Decreasing enzyme activity via low-protein diets implied that less aflatoxin was being transformed into the dangerous aflatoxin metabolite that had the potential to bind and to mutate the DNA. We decided to test this implication. Did a low-protein diet actually decrease the binding of aflatoxin product to DNA, resulting in fewer adducts? An undergraduate student in my lab, Rachel Preston, did the experiment, chart 3.3, and showed that the lower the protein intake, the lower the amount of aflatoxin DNA adducts. 23. We now had impressive evidence that low protein intake could markedly decrease enzyme activity and prevent dangerous carcinogen binding to DNA. These were very impressive findings, to be sure. It might even be enough information to explain how consuming less protein leads to less cancer. But we wanted to know more and be doubly assured of this effect, so we continued to look for other explanations. As time passed, we were to learn something really quite remarkable. Almost every chart 3.2, effect of dietary protein on enzyme activity. 250, 200, 150, 150, 0, 20% protein, 76% decrease in enzyme activity with low protein diets, 5% protein, turning off cancer. Chart 3.3, decrease in carcinogen binding to nucleus components caused by low protein feeding, 72% decrease in DNA binding. DNA, 68% decrease in chromatin 1-1 binding. Chromatin, 66% decrease in protein binding. Protein, 53. Every time we searched for a way, or mechanism, by which protein works to produce its effects, we found one. For example, we came to discover that low-protein diets, or their equivalents, reduce tumors by the following mechanisms. Less aflatoxin entered the cell F4-26. Cells multiplied more slowly. Multiple changes occurred within the enzyme complex to reduce its activity. 27. The quantity of critical components of the relevant enzymes was reduced. 28,29. Less aflatoxin DNA adducts were formed. 23,30. The fact that we found more than one way, mechanism, that low-protein diets work was eye-opening. It added a great deal of weight to the results of the Indian researchers. It also suggested that biological effects, although often described as operating through single reactions, more likely operate through a large number of varied simultaneous reactions, very likely acting in a highly integrated and concerted manner. Could this mean that the body had lots of backup systems in case one was bypassed in some way? As research unfolded in the subsequent years, the truth of this thesis became increasingly evident. From our extensive research, one idea seemed to be clear: lower protein intake dramatically decreased tumor initiation. This finding, even though well substantiated, would be enormously provocative for many people. 54. The China study. Protein and promotion. To go back to the lawn analogy, sowing the grass seeds in the soil was the initiation process. We found, conclusively, through a number of experiments, that a low-protein diet could decrease, at the time of planting, The number of seeds in our cancerous lawn. That was an incredible finding, but we needed to do more. We wondered, what happens during the promotion stage of cancer, the all-important reversible stage? Would the benefits of low protein intake achieved during initiation continue through promotion? Practically speaking, it was difficult to study the stage of cancer because of time and money. It is an expensive study that allows rats to live until they develop full tumors. Each such experiment would take more than 2 years, the normal lifetime of rats, and would have cost well over $1,000, even more money today. To answer the many questions that we had, we could not proceed by studying full tumor development. I would still be in the lab 35 years later. This is when we learned of some exciting work just published by others 3L that showed how to measure tiny clusters of cancer-like cells that appear right after initiation is complete. These little microscopic cell clusters were called foci. Foci are precursor clusters of cells that grow into tumors. Although most foci do not become full-blown tumor cells, they are predictive of tumor development. By watching foci develop and measuring how many there are and how big they become 32, we could learn indirectly how tumors also develop and what effect protein might have. By studying the effects of protein on the promotion of foci instead of tumors, we could avoid spending a lifetime and a few $1 million working in the lab. What we found was truly remarkable. Foci development was almost entirely dependent on how much protein was consumed, regardless of how much aflatoxin was consumed. This was documented in many interesting ways, first done by my graduate students Scott Appleton 33 and George Tunau 4. A typical comparison is shown in chart 3.4. After initiation with aflatoxin, foci grew, were promoted, far more with the 20% protein diet than with the 5% protein diet. 33-34. Up to this point, all of the animals were exposed to the same amount of aflatoxin. But what if the initial aflatoxin exposure is varied? Would protein turning off cancer? Chart 3.4, dietary protein and foci formation. 3.5, 3.0, 2.5, OJ, 62.0 C, 0, 0, 6, OJ 1.50 colon, 0, 0, L.L 1.0, 5, 0, 5% 20%. Dietary protein level. Chart 3.S, carcinogen dose versus protein intake. 100/90, 80, OJ 76, C, 060, 6, OJ 50 colon, 0, 040 L.L, 30, 20, 10, 0 1.1, 1, high AF, low protein, low AF, high protein, 55, 56. The HENA study still have an effect? We investigated this question by giving 2 groups of rats either a high aflatoxin dose or a low aflatoxin dose, along with a standard baseline diet. Because of this, the 2 groups of rats were starting the cancer process with different amounts of initiated cancerous seeds. Then, during the promotion phase, we fed a low protein diet to the high aflatoxin dose groups and a high protein diet to the low aflatoxin dose group. We wondered whether the animals that start with lots of cancerous seeds are able to overcome their predicament by eating a low protein diet. Again, the results were remarkable. Chart 3.5. Animals starting with the most cancer initiation, high aflatoxin dose, developed substantially less foci when fed the 5% protein diet. In contrast, animals initiated with a low aflatoxin dose actually produced substantially more foci when subsequently fed the 20% protein diet. A principle was being established. Foci development, initially determined by the amount of the carcinogen exposure, is actually controlled far more by dietary protein consumed during promotion. Protein during promotion trumps the carcinogen, regardless of initial exposure. With this background information, we designed a much more substantial experiment. Here is a step-by-step sequence of experiments carried out by my graduate student Linda Youngman. 35 all animals were dosed with the same amount of carcinogen, then alternately fed either 5% or 20% dietary protein during the 12-week promotion stage. We divided this 12-week promotion stage into 4 periods of 3 weeks each. Period 1 represents weeks 1 to 3, period 2 represents weeks 4 to 6, and so on. When animals were fed the 20% protein diet during periods 1 and 2, 20 to 20, foci continued to enlarge, as expected. But when animals were switched to the low-protein diet at the beginning of period 3, 20-20, 5, there was a sharp decrease in foci development. And, when animals were subsequently switched back to the 20% protein diet during period 4, 20-20-5-20, foci development was turned on once again. In another experiment, in animals fed 20% dietary protein during period 1 but switched to 5% dietary protein during period 2, 20-5, foci development was sharply decreased. But when these animals were returned to 20% dietary protein during period 3, 20-5-20, we again saw the dramatic power of dietary protein to promote foci development. These several experiments, taken together, were quite profound. Foci growth could be reversed, up and down, by switching the amount of protein being consumed, and at all stages of foci development. Turning off cancer 57. These experiments also demonstrated that the body could remember early carcinogen insults 35, 36 even though they might then lie dormant with low protein intake. That is, exposure to aflatoxin left a genetic imprint that remained dormant with 5% dietary protein until 9 weeks later, when this imprint reawakened to form foci with 20% dietary protein. In simple terms, the body holds a grudge. It suggests that if we are exposed in the past to a carcinogen that initiates a bit of cancer that remains dormant, this cancer can still be reawakened by bad nutrition sometime later. These studies showed that cancer development is modified by relatively modest changes in protein consumption. But how much protein is too much or too little? Using rats, we investigated a range of 4 to 24% dietary protein, chart 3.637. Foci did not develop with up to about 10% dietary protein. Beyond 10%, foci development increased dramatically with increases in dietary protein. The results were later repeated a second time in my laboratory by a visiting professor from Japan, Fumiyuki Horio. 38. Plus dash. C. CLJ. E. 0. O. QJ. CLJ. O. U. O. LL. Chart 3.6, foci promotion by dietary protein. 90. 80. 70. 60. 50. 40, 30, 20, 10. Adequate protein. For body growth. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 20. Percent dietary protein. 58. The China study. The most significant finding of this experiment was this: foci developed only when the animals met or exceeded the amount of dietary protein, 12%, needed to satisfy their body growth rate. 39. That is, when the animals met and surpassed their requirement for protein, disease onset began.